Yeah.
various investors and brands and such. And I wanted to put a lot of black screen after that so that you could forget that you had just sat through a bunch of logos on the screen. Um, and I'm just like, okay, like all right, like getting started early. But then he talks about the double V in the Witch, and he's like, yeah, I came across that a lot when I was doing all my research, and so I felt like in old typecast, that's how they had to make W's. So I felt that that gave it a nice period timey feel, you know.
Yeah,
Oh, look at that, we're
it does.
live.
Oh, look at that. We're live. Hello, everyone. How's it
How's it
going?
going?
Long time no see. Welcome to another Sunday stream. We haven't done a proper one of these in a while.
We're back.
Quite a while. We're
We're
back.
back.
Maybe
After a
I did a
long hiatus, we are back. We have returned from the promised land to bring you the news. Robert Eggers has a new movie. It's gonna be pretty cool. It's got
I
vampires
hope
and
so.
Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, two good things. We like both of those things. Yeah, so that's coming out on Christmas itself, if I understand
That
correctly.
is, and I'm gonna be there on Christmas myself, having a beer at the Alamo and some of that churro popcorn, baby.
Churro popcorn?
Yeah, they have churro popcorn on the menu. It's like the butteriest, fattiest shit you've ever eaten in your life. It's so goddamn good. Just cinnamon sugar popcorn covered in butter.
Yeah, I
Amazing.
can imagine. I can imagine such a thing. Oh yeah, but yeah, I don't know how much you caught when you went live. We were talking about the double V of the witch showing up in a lot of old period texts from the time. I think it's a fun choice because I like calling it the VVitch.
He
A lot of
he
people
did the,
seem
he
to.
did the same thing in the commentary. He was
Yeah.
yeah, he calls it the VVitch.
I hope you're all having a wonderful Sunday. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about The Witch, first of Robert Eggers' feature films. Next
Yeah.
Sunday, we'll be doing The Lighthouse, and the Sunday after that, probably, we'll be doing The Northman. That's the name of it.
Yeah.
Probably should have called it The Nosferatu, just
Yeah.
for consistency's
Just to be
sake.
consistent, he
Yeah.
kind of broke his own meta there, but
Yeah. Well, so it goes.
paradigm shift.
Yeah, so let's talk about this straight away because Robert Eggers has popped up in online criticism recently. Mr. Redhead has pointed it out. Did you guys see that Eggers was needlessly criticized this past week because he dared to send a 4-year consideration letter to the Critics Association for Nosferatu? He was called pretentious. I'm
What?
guessing, Hugh, that since you are not on Twitter/X, you have not heard about this.
No. I have not.
Well, so he sent a 4-year consideration letter to the critics, you know, talking about why they should consider Nosferatu for awards and such. And people criticized it as if it was really like try hard and pretentious.
Isn't that
But I read it and I'm just like, he's just passionate about his movie and he's trying to sell it to people,
isn't that just
so
what you're
that
supposed to do? I thought that's like how it worked if you thought.
I know the studio will advertise and market it looking for awards if they think there's a decent chance it could win some. They do for your consideration campaigns. I don't know how common it is for the director to write a letter themselves arguing its merits. That might be a common thing. I just really don't know. I've never really seen one of these before. So I don't know if this is a unusual thing or not, but it seemed pretty well, don't you want him to be passionate about his own movie? Like
Yeah,
don't you want him to think it's good? And I mean, it's not like the letter is like, I'm amazing. Look at all these amazing things I did. A lot of it is just singing the praises of all his collaborators. So, not quite sure what's supposed to be cringe about that.
yeah. I like it, especially since he kind of took a step back from from the Northman. He went back to doing a budget range that he's a little more comfortable with.
Oh yeah.
So it's a small, like, this is a comparatively small movie. It dropped from about 90 million reported down to about 10. It seems like you would want the director, like, it's not like there's a gigantic machine behind this churning it around. Like, somebody probably advised him to do this, right? Like he might even be one of the key producers on the film. So like I don't know, man. That's
It
fucking
just comes
stupid.
across as earnest
Yeah.
and like you're trying to sell people on your movie, which is part of the gig. So, not quite sure what's supposed to be cringe about that. He seems like a very earnest, sincere guy.
Yeah.
Everything I've heard him talk about, write about, speak about, I quite like him. He seems like a cool dude, and
Yeah.
he's one of my favorite, up and coming filmmakers. He's made 3 features so far, and they've all been good.
Yeah.
Some better than others, perhaps, but I think they're all pretty
Yeah.
solidly good, and I'm
I
excited to
like all
talk
of
about
them.
all of them.
I'm
Yeah.
a fan of all of them. I like he has a very particular style, and a very particular way of thinking about making movies that is really interesting. And I was saying earlier, this is the kind of guy who I would love to have a couple of beers with and just talk about, whatever is on his mind, whatever
hmm
he's thinking about at the time. Because I mean, his commentary on The Witch, even early on, it's very clear that he is extremely detail oriented and that he knows what he's talking about.
Almost autistically so,
Almost
yes.
almost autistically. So yeah, his his comments about certain things like the fact that Black Phillip is not quite the correct type of goat, that the breed of goat that this group might have had. Actually, the feral goats in New Zealand that English settlers brought with them, those would be the closest representative. But we tried and we just couldn't get one of those in time and have it trained to do the things that we needed it to do. So that's life. That's how it goes. So you tried. Is what I'm hearing. You were like,
Yeah.
you were like, well, could I get one? Like, I'd really like that. He is
Yeah.
very proud of the fact that the horse in this movie is an accurate representation of the type of breed of horse that's a New England farming family might have. But he
Yeah.
was very self-deprecating on the fact that the dog is not. So
Yeah. Well, that's probably what I admire most about him. There's a lot to admire, I think, but the sort of level of attention to detail he has, especially because everything he's made so far, and from what I understand, everything he intends to make ever is a period piece.
yeah,
And he's clearly very interested in history, interested in firsthand accounts from the time period, and getting these sort of details right as much as is possible within budget constraints and things
yeah.
like that. For
Well, and
example, the
go ahead.
sets in The Witch, they're not, it's like they're using like period accurate carpentry techniques to build them, so they're not like just using screws and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like that level, you get the feeling when you watch his movies that you're in good hands in terms of historical accuracy, at least for a movie,
yeah,
right? Or like that he's trying as hard as he possibly can to get all those details right. And beyond that, I would say in terms of the spirit of the storytelling itself, not just costumes and dialect and things like that, he seems to really care about just presenting things as they would have been instead of trying to comment too much on the past. A lot of people only, a lot of filmmakers and writers only really seem, at least these days, only really seem interested in history insofar as they want to make commentary on it instead of just presenting it how it would be. Like for The Northman and for this movie, especially, the sort of supernatural worldview of the characters is just sort of presented very matter of factly. Like this is what it was like to be this type of person in this time period. We're
yeah.
not we're not doing a whole lot in the way of criticizing it. We're just presenting it as is and letting you experience that and live in that world. And I find that really admirable. It's very refreshing, and there's not a lot of people doing it like him in that regard these days. So you
Yeah.
love to see it.
Yeah, I really love the way that he treats it too. It was interesting. He was talking about the son, the older son, Caleb's character arc through, and he says stuff like, man, I really would have hated to be a Puritan. I think that sounds pretty rough. And as you can see, Caleb is kind of going through it a little bit
Yeah.
in trying to understand. He's like, predestination is a hard thing to wrap your mind around, even today. And I think back
Even
then,
as an adult,
yeah,
yeah.
even as an adult, and he's like, and I think you can see quite quite clearly Caleb is having a rough go of it. But like
Hmm.
that's sort of how how he approaches his stories, right? Is that he tries to put you and his characters in that mindset and just kind of give you a nice little glimpse into what it would look like. And
Yeah.
I really do appreciate that. It feels like something that only comes along once in a while.
Yeah.
A sort of a sense of artistic accuracy, I guess, that only comes along once in a while. You know, like you have your Kubricks, with your Barry Lyndon, and then you have this. You know, it's kind of in that. I feel like he's kind of in that realm, right? Like
Yeah.
to me,
So Topaz Dude mentions sort of, I just want to elaborate on the distinction between presenting history as it was and like commenting on it, because I think, choosing what to focus on is a comment, right? So, like, obviously, what he's choosing to tell as the story, it reflects how he feels about it to a degree. But one of the things that separates it from just like looking back on the past and judging it as like a holier than thou, like, we are enlightened here in the future. Look at all these stupid people in the past, is like, the idea. So, predestination, this sort of very harsh Protestant um, worldview that the dad has in this movie, that the son is legitimately trying and failing to sort of come to grips with. It's not just that he placed a character there to criticize and not understand it and kind of bump up against the harsh edges of it. It's like, well, that it just makes sense that a kid would struggle with that, and that there would be kids in that time period who did struggle with it. Like, that's just a believable, realistic component to the
yeah.
story. You know what I mean? It doesn't read as Robert Eggers sitting in an armchair in the year of our Lord 2024 and going, "Oh, these stupid Puritans." You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Well, he approaches it with a real, I want to say like a tenderness almost for the characters that's very refreshing. Because even though he clearly he clearly is not for the idea of Calvinist predetermination. You know, that's clearly something he doesn't quite grasp. But he has a reverence for the characters who do really adhere to this. Like when he talks about Ralph Ineson's character, he has such an idea of him as this doting, loving father who's just kind of doing his best, and putting him in a situation where in situations and in scenes where his his love for his family kind of wins out over his principles. And I think that's really interesting. He also talks about, and there's a scene where in a moment of crisis, he's crying up to God that he's licking the dust of the earth, and he talks about how he's read about that, and he finds it very very interesting that a lot of these Puritan Calvinists would perform ritual like that to sort of show that they are humbled before God, because he finds it quite Catholic, ritualistically speaking. And he just thinks it's kind of a fascinating thing that it bleeds its way in. So I really I don't know. He brings a very unbiased observer and an interested observer's character to his direction, and I think it's really worth watching. It's really
Yeah.
worth checking it out every time he has something new to make.
Yeah, so let's rewind a bit and we'll look at the overview of The Witch. So, The Witch, obviously, it's his first feature film. He had done a few shorts before that. The Witch came out in, what was it, 2015? Yes, and it's an interesting movie in a lot of respects. I think probably the most obviously remarkable thing about it ties into what we've been talking about with period pieces, is that it's a period piece horror. And I remember the first time I saw it, right around when it came out, I was like, "Oh, this is very refreshing." There's, like, this kind of, it opened up a possibility for me, like, "Oh, there should be way more of these.
Yeah,
There should be
yeah.
horror movies in all sorts of different old time periods, Like, why don't we see more of this stuff?" Obviously, it can be expensive to make period piece movies, but
He
I
does a really good job on quite a small budget,
yeah, I think
for
this was like 4 or 5 million, this movie.
yeah, and
And
it's
it's definitely written in a way to make it efficient to film as much as possible. Like, obviously, they had to build all these sets, they had to get all this period accurate attire and everything of that nature. But it's a really small group of characters in only a couple locations. So I think he was smart to write it that way as well. And then it also it's it was kind of at the early wave of A24's ascendance in
Yeah.
popularity, right? So they weren't quite a household name at this point, and movies like this really helped
That put them on the
establish
map, yeah.
them as like sort of alt horror, if that makes sense. Producing these movies that aren't quite, the Conjuring movies and a lot of the basic kind of horror, like jump scares and things like that you saw a lot of at the time. This movie is definitely not a jump scare type movie. It's very slow and methodical, and there's just a creeping sense of dread, things just getting worse and worse as it goes, but it's not doing a lot of the stereotypical horror movie things of the time. So it kind of emerges as a sort of refreshing. Oh, this is quite different than what we've been seeing a lot of in the last few years. So it stands apart, and it really helped to make A24's brand and image, I would say. It was a big part of it. Like this, especially in the horror realm, like this and Hereditary were both very good for A24. But yeah, like I said, for a first feature, let's just talk about that straight out of the gate. This is an incredible first feature.
Yeah.
This is really remarkable. I have a couple, criticisms of the movie. It's not the greatest movie ever, but like for a first feature, this is incredible. It's really, really well put together. I can see why, for example, that Willem Dafoe saw this movie and he's like, I need to work with that guy.
Yeah.
And so now Willem Dafoe will probably be in every movie he ever makes until one of them dies.
He's got an in with Willem Dafoe and with the entire Skarsgård family now. You've got a pretty solid stable of actors there, I think.
Yeah, I think it's understandable that they see his movies and they're like, "Oh, that's different. That's cool." Like they're the kind of movies that I'm not surprised that actors seem to really love, especially because of the dialogue. I think the dialogue is one of the best things about The Witch. A lot of it has been mentioned in chat, comes from firsthand diaries and journals from the time period. I don't know what percentage of it is lifted directly from firsthand accounts. I don't know if he mentions that in the commentary, but
Quite
it's a
few
lot.
times he mentions actually like certain lines that the characters have said he pulled straight out of diaries that he was reading for his research.
Yeah.
Like their entire scenes full of arguments that he pulled from diaries of the time. Which is quite interesting. And just, I mean,
and it all
attention.
feels so real.
Yeah.
I love the dialogue in this movie. I think it's one of its strongest aspects. Yeah, so I guess before we jump into going chronologically through the movie and everything, Hugh, what's your overall take on the movie? What do you think of The Witch?
The VVitch. I think it's pretty similar to yours. I mean, like it's not the greatest movie ever made, and like I think even it's funny because like he mentions several times in his commentary, that he can't stand watching it. There's certain times where there was one particular shot, I think it's like right after the father and the son get ready to go into the woods, right? And he's like, this shot fucking sucks. I hate this. I can't stand this. The director of photography also can't stand this. We really wanted to get something more cinematic, something that looks better. We just ran out of time. We shot it in. This is another thing that I think is quite commendable. They shot it in 26 days. So it's a very small first feature, 26 days. Lots of there's lots of dolly shots in the woods that work quite well. There's very naturalistic, period accurate lighting in a lot of scenes that, again, like really just add to the vibe. The dialogue is fantastic. The character dynamics are really good.
Just to jump in really quick, I would add that 26 days is a pretty impressive, shooting schedule considering how much of the movie takes place outside.
Yes. Yeah.
That complicates things quite a bit because weather, obviously. Anyway, continue.
The weather affects it a lot. I mean, there's sparing use of CGI throughout the movie, and it does it looks really good. The practical effects that he manages to execute. He's got a really great team, and he knows how to keep them around and keep them happy. And I mean, this is a really strong sign of what is to come in his filmmaking moving forward. So, you know, again, not my favorite of his movies. Definitely has some weak points, but I mean, damn, man, it's pretty good.
Good movie.
It's a really good movie.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I watched it again. So this is probably the third time I've seen it, but I watched it again last night. I made the mistake of getting high before I watched it because I was just like, why not? Why not? And it fucked me up this time around. I don't know what it is, especially obviously I think being stoned had a little something to do with it, but I had kind of forgotten just how fucked up the movie is. You know, I just had it in my head like, oh yeah, The Witch, that's a cool movie. Watching it again this time, I felt especially bad for all the characters. It's a rough watch. Um, it's pretty horrific in every sense of the word, and I really appreciate that about it. It's a movie that you know, even having watched it a few times, it's still kind of hard to watch. There's some scenes that really get to me. It's tough. I needed like a palate cleanser just to like watch something nice and wholesome afterwards before I went to bed.
Yeah.
But it's really effective. Aside from a couple small little things, like for example, this is a running theme with a couple of the sort of what would I say the technical flaws I think the movie has. I think it cheats with sound a few times.
Yeah.
There's a few scenes where it's like, oh, you just wanted a surprising moment, so you kind of cheated the fact that this should probably make noise but doesn't. You know, it's like it's not as egregious as the classic sort of bad movie trope where like a ninja bus comes and like hits someone and you don't hear it coming for just because you want the surprising moment. There's a couple little moments in The Witch where he kind of cheats sound a little bit that I don't love.
The sound of the knife towards the end of the movie that just has like full on slasher like shink shink vibes.
Yeah, there's a couple little things like that. Yeah, but you know, overall, just incredibly well put together. It's a very impressive movie. I think the harshest criticism I would have of like the aesthetic aspects of the film is that it's a bit sort of desaturated for my taste.
Yeah,
you know,
they're one of the things I think that I find, and he mentions this himself at one point, and I tend to agree a little bit, is that there aren't as many moments of levity as I think there could have been in some of the film. I think he mentions the kids being tied to the fence with leashes and bells at one point. He's like, yeah, like people laugh at that, and I kind of wish I had included a few more scenes that would give people the opportunity to experience a little bit of levity in the middle of all this darkness, because it's going to go right back to being miserable in a couple of seconds. And so it can be like, even though it's only an hour and a half, it can be kind of a brutal watch, you know. But you know, I that may be a little bit nitpicky. I think I think it works well with what the story is trying to tell. But I think that there could have been a little more.
It's just not an easy watch, I would say.
Yeah.
Oh, what was I gonna add? Oh, damn it. I lost that train of thought. Oh, speaking of the levity, it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because there's a couple tiny funny moments in this. Like, I am the Witch of the Wood. Clackety
clackety. Clackety clackety.
Stuff like that is amusing, but there's not quite enough of it that your brain goes like, oh, this is funny. It's just like
yeah, it doesn't give you as much time to breathe.
It's funny though, because the lighthouse, he kind of leans full into that.
Yeah,
the Lighthouse is a very funny movie. Yeah. It's my favorite of his three. We'll just get that out of the way now. I think The Lighthouse is my favorite of the group,
I would say,
though I like all of them for various reasons. The Lighthouse is hysterical to me. Yeah. It's very funny. It's funny because I've heard Eggers talk about it. He was on, I think, Roger Deakins' Team Deacon's podcast, and he was describing it. He was saying that he was talking to his wife, and he's like, I think this is a pretty funny movie. And his wife goes like, no one's gonna think this is funny. What are you talking about? And it's like, no, don't listen to her. Don't listen
to her. Robert Pattinson is fucking hilarious.
Yeah. There's so many scenes that are like built like jokes, structured for the sake of punchlines, and just really amusing, funny stuff that happens. Anyway, It's funny that he had that thought that he was like, I feel like I could have made the witch a little give it a little more levity, and then he
Turns
went
around and
hard
goes
with the
really hard
levity.
into it with
Yeah.
yeah, with the lighthouse. Also, I just want to mention before we dive into it, there have been some comments about Anya Taylor-Joy's face, and yeah, we had been talking about that a little bit. It's I was for a second before I made a joke about cooking with ass. Speaking of ass, Anya Taylor Joy final scene, and then I had to question myself. I was like, she's not underage in this movie, right? Like we're playing with like we're
No, you're
we're
safe.
we're safe, right? But she looks much younger and fuller and in the face. The buccal fat surgery trend in Hollywood, I think, has been a plague, and Ryan Gosling is doing a pretty good job of reversing that, I think, himself, because he seems to have injected all of the buccal fat of every other celebrity who got it removed straight into his face. So, the pendulum swings back the other way. Uh, I don't know if any of you have seen it, but Google it. Look up Ryan Gosling cheeks 2024, and you'll see what I mean.
That whole paragraph sounded kind of unhinged. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like,
I
just,
have thoughts. I have thoughts,
just
Jamie.
gonna, just gonna put that out there. No, yeah, she looked more like a normal person in this movie than she does these days. I don't know if it's buccal fat surgery or Ozempic or whatever it is, but it's a shame. We'll just say that. Yeah, this is her breakout role. I don't know if I'm sure she had roles before this, but this
Was
was certainly.
Split before this or after?
Good question. I'm gonna look that up real quick because I don't know. I haven't actually seen Split. Split is after. Yes. The Witch was,
So The
yeah,
Witch was first?
this was the breakout role. Yep. And she's very, very good in this movie. I can see why she rose to prominence. One of the other things I really like about this movie, especially because the first time I saw it, I didn't recognize any of these people. And I really like it when movies do that. I'm all for, movie stars like Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt and people like that, George Clooney, whoever else. But when you get to see a movie that you can really immerse yourself in because you don't recognize anyone in it at all, and they're still really good actors, that's a great feeling. I love that.
Yeah.
Because they just feel like the characters because you've never seen them in anything else before. And I've seen, people like Ralph Ineson, I'm assuming I'm saying that right, in Things Sense. He's a very talented actor. He's got an amazing, amazing voice. I'm sure we'll
Yeah.
talk about that. The dad.
Kate was in Game of Thrones playing a very similar character, actually. So
Okay,
I had seen her before, and I quite enjoy her performances in both of those. She's in the first season of Game of Thrones.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, the actors are really talented in this. Even those annoying little twins, they do a pretty good job. Yeah, a lot of great actors in this. Um, well, I suppose
Yeah, we'll
we could
just
just jump
jump
into
right
the
into it.
movie. Yeah.
So,
Do.
to begin.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Mhm.
no, one of the things that I was saying is that you can kind of tell this is Robert Eggers, some unfamiliar territory with Robert Eggers on the director's track, which I would recommend listening to just because it is quite interesting, and he is a very casual conversational guy with a lot of interesting things to say. But he opens up by saying like, well, these are all the logos of the various investor groups you know, who donated money to the film. And I tried to put a lot of black screen in between that and the title, so that you could have time to forget about it. So he's clearly not quite sure where to begin. But yeah, we begin in the meeting house, as Ralph Ineson is arguing with some Puritans about who's holier than thou, who's the
Oh
most
yeah,
pious.
let's talk about the dialogue because I love it. It's great. So he says, "What went we out into this wilderness to find, leaving our country, kindred, our fathers' houses? We have travailed a vast ocean. For what? For what?" And then they say, "We must ask thee to be silent." And he says, "Was it not for the pure and faithful dispensation of the Gospels and the kingdom of God?" And they're like, no more. We are your judges and not you ours. He says, I cannot be judged by false Christians, for I have done nothing, say preach Christ true gospel. They say, must you continue to dishonor the laws of the commonwealth and the church with your prideful conceit? He says, if my conscience sees it fit, and they say, well, then you shall be banished out of this plantation's liberties. He says, I would be glad on it. Then take your leave and trouble us no further. And right before he leaves, he says, how sadly hath the Lord testified against you. And then they leave.
Love it.
So
I love the positioning of this guy as like so this arrogant this arrogant
prideful.
like prideful like holier than thou kind of guy. I it's really well done and really accurate to the time, the two types of Christians who came to Massachusetts in the New World. Yeah, you got the Puritans and the Separatists. Really, kind of like showcases that very well right from the get go. And then
One
sets
of the
you up
things
for
I
what's going to
find
happen.
really interesting about this is that we don't bother explaining what the sort of theological differences are.
Yeah, no, we don't
We're
really need
just
to,
told,
right? Like we just know.
no, we don't really need to, and that's what I think is really strong. Apparently, in the original script, there was slightly more information about that. I think it was very wise of him to just cut that because it
Yeah,
doesn't really matter. What matters is that he knows he's right and that he's doing, he's doing Christianity the right way, and they're not happy with him about it. And he's like, "Oh yeah, well, I'd rather be right than
I'd
be
rather be
around any
right
of
than
you."
safe. Yeah,
Yes. And
I'd,
so, yep. And he's like, well, I'm just doing, Christ's work the right way. If you guys want to be assholes about it, fine. I'll just leave. And so he takes his family and he leaves the comfort of the plantation. I quite like the shot of them leaving, um,
yeah,
where we're looking over the shoulders of them on the back of the cart that they're leaving on. And you can see a couple people. This is probably the most we see of the actual plantation itself. We see a couple Native American guys, we see some traders and stuff like that, and then they close the doors on them, and then we just see them riding off into the wilderness. It's a really strong start for a few reasons. One of the things I really like about it, and just in terms of the filmmaking, is that even though she doesn't really say anything in the whole first scene, the movie starts just with a shot of Anya Taylor-Joy. It's a simple thing, it's basic filmmaking, but like this is the main character. This is the person we're seeing all of this through. We don't get the close-up shot of the dad as he's speaking. We don't get close-ups of the governors who are,
no,
judging him and then kicking him out. We get the close-up of her, right? And then everything else we kind of see, and it's very naturalistic lighting, so like we don't, like there's the big blown out window behind the dad, so we don't really see him too clearly yet. You know what I mean? But we're just like laser focused on her. And when they all sort of turn and leave, she kind of stands there frozen because she doesn't want to leave at first and has to be told, like, come on, we're leaving.
yeah.
Um,
And one of the things that I really appreciate about Anya Taylor-Joy's performances is that she's got a particular kind of look that makes it difficult to sort of like you don't know what she's thinking, but you know that there's something behind her look. Like you can't tell if it's like fear or exactly what it is that she's experiencing as she listens to this helplessness in some way. But like you can infer quite a lot just from a stare, a little bit off camera. And
oh,
he,
yeah, she's very good.
yeah,
Very good in this movie. She says a lot without saying anything.
yeah.
Very impressive presence
I
on
also,
screen.
I also really like how we don't see the father's face, very much in this first scene. We see him like his silhouette from the back, basically, in
Yeah.
the costume, and very tall and imposing and dark.
Oh, and of course, the incredibly deep voice
yeah,
is very commanding as well.
yeah,
I It's really interesting. First of all, I love the dialogue. I'm sure that has been lifted directly because it just sounds so very real to me. I love this as the setup because a lot of movies, even this is kind of a slow burn movie, but right from the get-go, like, oh, this is the central conflict of the movie. Like, boom, we have everything right here. It's like he is a very religious, pious man who has sort of slightly idiosyncratic beliefs about religion that are at odds with the other colonists, the other settlers. And so he's kicked out for it, and now they have to go brave the wilderness just as a family off alone in the woods. And it's like,
Yeah,
oh, things are going to go wrong, and it's all going to be his fault in some sense. You know what I mean?
yeah.
He just kind of sets up the whole movie right out of the gate, and I think it's very impressive and efficient in terms of how it uses its time.
One thing I also find very interesting about his style, right, is that it is very unique visually. You know, like his movies all look alike in a lot of different ways. There's a very particular framing method that he uses, and it's a lot of I want to say like medium wides, and you know set up in a way that sort of resembles it reminds me a little bit of like a dark version of Barry Lyndon, right, where you've got these like paintings that are inspiring the shot compositions, and then his style is very unique, but he says that he doesn't storyboard very much, if at all. He
Yeah.
attempts to avoid storyboarding as often as he can, which makes it a little bit more impressive to me, honestly, that he managed to get this whole thing shot in about 26 days.
Yeah.
Because he just sort of was like, well, we'll just vibe with it, man. We'll just figure out where it's gonna go.
Did
Um,
he mention anything about a shot list?
he shot listed it. Yeah, he shot
Okay.
lists it very extensively, but he apparently hates storyboarding. So it's just,
Interesting.
yeah, quite interesting. He did not say why he doesn't storyboard. He just says he does not
He just
like it and
doesn't
he
fuck with
avoids it. He doesn't fuck with it. And I think that a lot of that probably comes down to his director of photography, what's his name?
Jaron Blaschke.
There you go, Jaron Blaschke, who is on all of his movies, and he is incredibly talented.
Yeah.
Very underrated part of, I think. So I think Robert Eggers gets most of the press because the director tends to. His DP on these movies is also ingenious. He has a lot of
Yeah.
really interesting ways of looking at things.
Well, I think I quite like the way his movies are shot and staged. You know, he doesn't get traditional coverage in a lot of scenes. He doesn't get the coverage you would expect to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, especially this very opening scene, just to use it as a microcosm, we get a close up on the face of Anya Taylor-Joy. And we get like a profile of the dad and the mom. We get like behind the dad's head. We don't see the sort of people he's arguing with in any close-up shot at all.
No, we
Like
get
we
a,
don't
like a
we don't get a
medium
good
wide
look
of
at
them
them.
sitting on the bench.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's less about any one of them as individuals. It's just sort of, you know, the broad view of all of them, what they represent as a group, right? And it's a really interesting choice, right? I like the shot that's kind of over the shoulder as we're leaving. I mentioned that already. Like the way it's kind of it narrows the view of the plantation as we're moving away from it. Like that's a really strong choice. There's a lot of very strong choices in terms of where to put the camera that are unusual and remarkable
Yeah.
in that way. So, someone mentioned the lyrics of the song they're singing as they move out. I think I have them here. Let's see. I will confess Jehovah with all heart, in secret and in assembly of the just. Great are the works of the Lord Jehovah, sought out of all that in them who do delight.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It's
I like that they start singing like as they're leaving. It's kind of singing as a way of like, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about we're leaving everyone else behind to go live off in the woods by ourselves. It's like we're gonna be happy and grateful here. That's one of the things that comes up a lot in the movie is especially the dad's insistence that like despite how harsh and bleak everything about their existence is, it's like no, we should be grateful. Like why should we expect good things? So it almost reminds me of that Louis C.K. line where it's like, why would anything good ever happen? It's like that kind of attitude. It's like, no, we're like spoilers. Later, there will be a child who dies, and they're like, well, I mean, it's kind of his basic attitude is like, we've been blessed that we haven't lost a child yet. We should be grateful. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's like, despite how harsh everything is, we should be grateful for what we do have.
Interesting note about that too is like apparently a lot of people asked him, well, like why isn't the family out looking for the baby, in the week since the baby disappears, right? And he was just like, well, in the sources you find out pretty pretty harshly that parents are instructed not to form close bonds with their child at this time until the child is like 4, because there's such a high chance that it'll just die before it hits that
Oh man,
age.
that's crazy.
So
Yeah.
like the mom's reaction in this is a bit unusual actually for a woman of the time period, which is
Mhm.
it adds a little bit of extra depth to it. I think it makes it a little
Well,
more
it's
interesting.
interesting too. Obviously, she's very attached to the child, and she grieves pretty harshly or
Yeah,
intensely when the child dies. But the more we learn about her, the more we realize that, like just below the surface, because she doesn't want to be a disobedient wife and everything like that. But just below the surface is someone who does not want to be here at all. She doesn't even want to be in America.
no, yeah, she did not want to go here. She was
No,
kind of
and so
dragged.
yeah, she was dragged here essentially, and so she's like, it's kind of all wrapped up together, right? The like, it's like, oh, now we're alone and we're losing children and everything's going to hell, and I don't even want to be here. I didn't want to leave England. Yeah, so
Yeah,
it's she's going through a lot. The feeling you get when you watch this movie is like, oh God, these poor people. Like every
yeah.
single one of them, you feel bad for them. I mean, maybe with the exception of the twins,
Yeah,
but
those little fuckers.
those little fuckers, but they get sort of, I don't know if possessed is the right word, but they get sort of corrupted pretty quickly. So we don't really get to see them be decent kids. They're pretty horrible from the word go in this movie.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the other thing that this movie really kind of like, when I first watched it, it kind of hit me with the idea of like, you hear the stories a lot, right? But it does until I sort of see it and visualize it and have a story to go with it, you never quite realize how hard it would have been for the people who came here from England,
Yeah,
to set up these little fucking homesteads and chop their corn and like try to carve out a new life for themselves, and
yeah,
like just how brutal it would have been for them to try to lift themselves up like that, and how hard it is to do that and to maintain these incredibly pig-headed principles that the father clings to at the beginning, that gets him kicked out of the community, basically just gets him
yeah.
ostracized. Like, you realize exactly how bad of a punishment exile really was at this time
Yes.
too.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, it
And
is rough.
but what's really interesting about the dad's character, we'll see this because, like, basically what happens next, they ride off into the wilderness. We get a shot or two of them just kind of camping in the woods before they eventually find where they're gonna build their new settlement, and then they find a nice spot, and then they all kneel down and thank the Lord for this place that they're gonna make their home. And then we fast forward to they've already built their little homestead, and what's really struck me about it this time around is how impressive it is. It's not
Yeah,
clear how much time has passed, but man, they've done a really good job. You know, like they have a horse, they have a dog. I believe they have 2 goats. They have how many mouths to feed? One, two, three, four, five, 6 mouths to feed. They have a main house for everything. They also have a barn for all the ghosts and stuff like that. And they
yeah,
have corn and they have like a fence and stuff like that. It's pretty impressive, honestly.
yeah,
I would say it's very impressive in some sense, but it's he's a very competent man, the dad, right? And
yeah.
so he's like, no, I can make it out on my own. You know what I mean? Like we don't need these people. I can do it. And he's doing a pretty good job until things start going wrong. But it just gets to this point where it's like, oh yeah, like things have been going all right for now, but winter's coming.
Yeah, one
And
bad winter kind of
yeah, yep,
screws the whole
exactly. Kind
pooch,
of shows how precarious the whole thing is.
Yeah, very, very much so. I really like too the details in the
Right.
background. Like
It's
some of the
someone.
roofs are half thatched. You know, you can see
Yeah.
those in the background, so it's like it's still a work in progress, right? There was one interesting. I didn't even think about this until I was watching it, but there's an interesting note that he was mentioning. So they put the goats in that little barn, right, which has a thatched
Mhm.
roof, and they kept having a problem with the thatching, you know, disappearing. And he was just like, what the fuck? Like, what is going on?" And as it turns out, the goats were eating the thatching on the roof. So he was like, "Oh, well, this just sort of illustrates to me why they never did this. You know, this is why you don't thatch your goat barn, I guess." Kind of moves
That's
on.
funny.
So,
But yes, I forgot that there's actually 7 mouths to feed because of the newborn. But the
yeah.
newborn doesn't last very long. Um, so yeah, I mean, obviously, like you can build a cabin pretty quickly. I also think it's remarkable because he doesn't really have. He has the son, and he has. Sorry, the son's name is Caleb. The daughter's name is Thomason to help out with stuff. The twins are essentially useless. It's just thing one and thing two. They don't they don't provide much help around the homestead.
They braid the
But
goat's fur and,
yeah,
yeah.
it's not clear what time of year they leave. I would say, but they basically have like a season essentially to set all this stuff up, and it's just pretty impressive. I would say they're doing a good job, but like it's been mentioned, one mistake or one tragedy, and it kind of
Yeah,
sends the
one
whole
bad.
thing spiral. Because they have no support system. There's no one else to help them, right?
Yeah.
Because he's just too prideful to hang around those people. Um, so one of the next things we see after they set up their little thing is we see Thomason, Anya Taylor-Joy's character, and she is praying aloud, and she's confessing to God. She says, "I here confess I have lived in sin. I have been idle of my work, disobedient of mine parents, neglectful of my prayer. I have in secret played upon thy Sabbath and broken every one of thy commandments in thought, followed the desires of my own will and not the Holy Spirit." And this is the most interesting part to me. "I know I deserve all shame and misery in this life and everlasting hellfire, but I beg thee, for the sake of thy Son, forgive me. Show me mercy, show me mercy, show me thy light."
I think one of my favorite parts of that is when I think it doesn't quite doesn't quite hit as hard if you're not as familiar, I guess, with like, or if they're just sort of in the back of your mind, right? But like, "I've broken every one of thy commandments in thought." That's that's huge, right? Like, that's a huge thing to admit, you know? Like,
Hmm.
not only we're talking adultery, we're talking murder, we're like every single one. That's fucking crazy. Like that. So she's having a rough time of it, right? Like, she
Yeah.
is not. She is
Well,
not.
that's one of the interesting things, especially when she's going to be messing with one of the twins by pretending to be a witch. But like how quickly and easily she plays that part
Yeah.
kind of reveals that that's all in there already for her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's pretty like she takes on the role naturally. And obviously, what she's admitting here is that she has a lot of dark thoughts. Let's say a lot of intrusive
I've let
thoughts.
me intrusive thoughts win.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, but my favorite part about that is that "I know I deserve all shame and misery in this life and everlasting hellfire, but I beg of thee, show me mercy." Right? It's like that's the attitude sort of pervading the film that these characters have, is that like we deserve the worst because we're awful. But please give us anything good at all, essentially. It's an interesting response to the harshness of their life, right? And their situation, and being just on the edge of the wilderness here with no one else around them. It's like we don't deserve anything good. Please just give us any sort of peace at all, right? It's an
Yeah.
interesting attitude to have. And we'll get more of that as we go. And then
It's a tough attitude to have, and for like to wrap your mind, like that's a difficult one that like I wonder at times when I like think about this, because these the Puritan movement and the separatist movement of the, against the Church of England is a really strange thing to me, because I wonder how the philosophy of, well, I mean, like, nobody really knows if you're like, most people probably are going to hell, right? There's only a
yeah.
few predestined to be saved, and you'll never know. there's no way of finding out. You can
Yeah.
never be sure. So, you know.
Well, because it's we'll get it later. There's a specific line saying that like it's really not about deeds. You know, like some Christian denominations place more emphasis on works, you know, like
Yeah.
what you do with your life, and obviously that's an obvious sort of moral component to it, you know, if you're a good person, then you go to heaven. Rather straightforward, it's easier, I think, especially for children to grasp that, as opposed to this, which is just we're all miserable, horrible creatures, empty of grace, and some of us are lucky enough to be filled with grace by God otherwise, and we have no idea who it's going to be or why or how it works or like, you know, how you earn like it's just like some of us are lucky and there's no way to know, and you know, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's like it's
I always
crazy.
wonder exactly how that managed to catch on to such an extent to, and like for people to be so devoted to it that they were willing to uproot their entire lives in every like about everything they knew, right? And sail
Mhm.
across a fucking ocean to come into like basically a harsh, rather rather desolate at points, especially in the winter. New England winters are, you know, are fucking rough, right? But like they
Mhm.
decided to like uproot their whole lives over this, right? Like this is a huge test of faith. You have to do something like that.
Oh
It's
yeah.
always fascinating to me that philosophy is what drove those people, you know, because it just doesn't it just doesn't seem to offer any sense of like any sense of comfort or any like anything at all to it, right? Because it's like, I mean, you're
Yeah.
basically confessing that at all moments you deserve pain and misery, you know.
Yeah.
It's wild to me.
It's what's really interesting about it, and I think the part that I cannot wrap my head around is the like, well, if you view life as this just horrible, brutal pain and misery, and that like you're not really owed anything good, then when you get good things, it's like, oh my gosh, what a blessing. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like it's you know sort of the opposite of this sort of like if anything if we're moving in any extreme in the modern world, it's just like no, I am entitled to a world that is doesn't have suffering in it, you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah. No,
there's
yeah,
but it's really interesting, especially when we consider the child that obviously dies in this movie and how everyone reacts to it. It's been mentioned in the chat already, but the mom is pretty convinced because it hasn't been baptized yet that it's in hell,
yeah,
right? And the kid is concerned about that, and he's like, "Wait, so does that mean Samuel's in hell? Like,
yeah,
please tell me." And he's having a rough time with that
yeah,
idea. And the dad is basically like, "We don't know, no one knows. That's
yeah,
up to God." And I'm like, "Oh, man, that's hard for a kid to wrap his
yeah.
head
That's
around."
got to be difficult. I mean, I would imagine that's difficult for anybody. Like it's difficult for the mom to wrap her head around too. And the kid asks a
Yeah.
question in that scene, right? Is like, "What wrong hath he done?" It's like, yeah, that's a question that I'm sure is on the minds of everybody there, right? Like, why would such a thing happen?
Yeah.
And you know, yeah, that
It's
it's
really it's really interesting, and I love the specifics of the dialogue when those conversations happen. We'll build up to that. So right after, you know, sort of confessing her sins, I think the next thing we see is either them just doing random homesteading work around the property, or it's like she wakes up in the morning, or Caleb wakes up in the morning. He's sort of tiptoeing across everyone to get out, and he sees
oh no,
Thomason.
that happens after the kid disappears.
Oh, wait, is that? Oh, okay.
Yeah, no,
Right,
because
right, you're right,
yeah.
it does. The kid. So, okay, let's talk about the kid disappearing because that's one of the first major things that happened, and it's also one of the scenes I like the least in the movie. I don't know how you feel about it,
Oh
but
really?
she she has the kid and she's playing peekaboo with it. You can see it probably on screen right now in the trailer. And kid's lying on the ground and playing peekaboo. Kid's having a whale of a time, as kids often do. And she she takes a moment, and then when she finally removes her hands, it says "Boo!" The kid is gone. Now, tell me what you think of this in terms of how this plays out. Like, I think the only way that can happen is something sort of supernatural, just because the timing of it, right?
Yeah, I
Like,
think well, and
there's
they
no way any sort of physical thing could have grabbed the kid and left and made it to the woods in time without making any noise. So like
Yeah, well,
the
and you
only
see,
explanation that makes sense to me is like, okay, this something actually supernatural in terms of its speed and ability to not make noise happen
so I
here.
think, well, I mean, I think what he and I've noticed this, on rewatches in the past, and he mentions it a little bit in the commentary, right? Is that they have fishing line tied to branches and sprouts of grass to kind of pull, as I assume, like the witch is invisible and is running away, so that like technically I guess it would be physical, but unseen, right? So it is
Okay.
supernatural, but it
Okay,
is
so here's the
physical.
thing. Even if it's here's my problem with it is that we hear the sounds when she looks up. We hear sounds of like branches and footsteps moving away,
Yeah.
but we don't hear any of them approaching or as the actual grabbing. Like the sound of the baby being snatched up makes no noise at all, and then they include footstep sounds afterwards.
Yeah, and
I
you
think it's
don't
a
see
really
the
odd
baby like
choice.
floating in the floating in the air as it's
No,
like running away.
it
So
happens.
yeah.
That's the thing that bothers me about it. It plays out too quickly and silently to make sense, but it's hard to imagine how to fix that.
Yeah, I
Like
mean,
she
I
would
do
have.
think it's a like vibes wise, I think it's a pretty good scene, and I know that scene, like that was the original opening scene of the movie, and I think it was sort of the genesis of the idea, right? Like where it all kind of sprung from is like the start of the original, like the way the story originally
Yeah,
would have started, you know?
it's the real inciting incident of the like everything going horribly wrong, right?
Yeah. I agree with you though that it's like it is a little bit it's one of those horror movie cheating things, right? Like we're
Yeah,
cheating to
that.
get the shock factor.
And so
Um,
that's here's the thing. I think it was kind of a mistake to have any sounds at all. Like when she looks up, you can hear like sounds, and then they're moving the brush to make it look like it's been running through that area.
yeah.
And I'm like, well, don't do that because you've already cheated the sound such that she doesn't hear it coming at all. Like you can't just pick a baby up out of hay without making any noise. You know what I mean? So like if you're gonna do that and this all happens silently and it just vanishes, then don't do the sort of footstep crackling in the brush sounds, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no,
I don't know.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that one. I think it's one of the examples of the movie sort of cheating its own rules to get, you know, to get a gasp, to get sort of like a freaky,
Yeah.
like an audience, like the closest that you're going to get really to like a jump scare in the movie, right? Is
Yeah.
that,
It's
um
my least favorite scene in the movie, and it's not bad, but I feel like we could have done that better. Like if it were me, for whatever it's worth, and this wouldn't necessarily improve the movie, but I would have tried to go somewhere along the lines of that she gets distracted by an animal or something like that,
yeah.
and then she like comes back and it's just gone or something
Yeah,
like that.
one of our chat has mentioned that as well. Like, yeah, if
Yeah,
she was
that just
distracted by a farm animal and goes, and then she comes back and the baby's gone. I think the
or
I think
the
the
smallest.
issue there too, though, is that, like, I mean, that makes sense. I don't know if he wanted it to be that much her fault, you know, because
Yeah,
like
I get
that.
that.
Yeah,
I get that. So the smallest tweak for me would be just having her keep her eyes closed for longer because it happens so quickly. I'm like, there's no time to. I don't know. It's something about it just doesn't quite work for me. I feel like it's the timing with the mix of the sound effects. It's just like, oh, that doesn't feel real.
yeah.
That just something about that feels very strange. And also, it's like we never see the supernatural beings in this movie be invisible. I mean, no pun, like obviously we wouldn't see them if they were invisible, but you know what I mean? That's not something we get in any other scene. It's much more
Yeah.
like shape shifting that's happening. Like,
Yeah, and he's like, but he's very attuned to like the way, and it's interesting that he doesn't mention in the commentary, like what sort of magic at that point he would be representing, because he is very attuned to like the old timey descriptions of how witches' magic worked, right? Because like the reason she steals the baby is because the muddled entrails of an unbaptized babe rubbed over the skin is what gives witches the power to fly.
Yeah.
So that's she does that in order to fly on her stick.
Yeah, witches are always after like destroying children and like stealing the seed of men and things like that. They're
Yeah,
they're very much antithetically opposed to the proper, bearing of children. You know what I mean? So like that all makes sense to me symbolically and
yeah,
supernaturally and everything. I think the invisible part is strange
yeah. I
because
don't
that
know
never
what
factors
exactly
into
he's going for in that situation,
because the
right? And he
shape
doesn't
shifting
seem to mention
that
it.
all makes sense to me. There's there's Black Phillip himself, obviously, who shapeshifts. The witch takes the form of a rabbit a couple times. There's moments where we don't see it directly, but like the witch enters into the barn that they get locked up in later, and like as something that comes down from the sky, right?
Yeah,
So I don't know if it's a bird or what, but the animal shapeshifting that makes total sense. Just something about the scene doesn't work for me. It's okay, but
yeah. I mean,
it's
it's a
my least
vibe.
favorite
Like
part.
I know exactly what you mean. It's vibes over logic,
Yeah,
and that is a bit of a detriment, right? Like it's there kind of to be the shocking incident. That's the part
yeah.
that I think feels the most like it feels the most like your standard horror film. You know?
Yes. Yeah, that's what I would say. It feels the cheapest part of the movie.
Yeah,
And it happens pretty quickly. But then basically everything from then on is amazing. So,
yeah,
um the next we see, which I think is a really bold choice, I would say, still to this day, is then he cuts to a woman running through the woods, but you can't quite tell what it is at first. And then we're with the witch, and you're like, oh, there's a witch. We're not going to bait whether the witch is real or anything. Obviously, throughout the movie, as it goes on, characters will wonder whether it was a wolf or a witch or whether Thomason did something, whatever it may be. But the movie's like, no, there's a witch, and she's out in the woods, and she's stealing babies, and she's killing the babies, muddling it with a big mortar and pestle, and then rubbing baby blood all over herself. Like it's like, oh fuck, okay.
yeah. We're in.
We're in. I think it's a really interesting choice because then it's not a question of whether this is just in their minds or anything like
Yeah,
that. I think it's a very strong choice because I think the lamest possible version of this movie is you remove those scenes and then people can speculate, oh, I wonder if this is just all in their heads or something.
yeah. What if
It's like,
what if
no.
it's all just Thomason like hallucinating? Oh
And
boy.
she killed the baby, or like, what if this is all a dream? It's like, no, shut up. We're not doing that. There's a real witch. She's out in the woods and she's killing babies. And it's like, perfect,
Yeah,
great.
I'm in.
Really hard to watch that scene of her
Yeah,
killing the baby,
dude.
I
That's
would
so.
say.
It is so fucked up. Yeah, like
Yeah, man.
that is a rough one. You
And
know.
the sound of the
Ugh.
like muddling, it's horrific. It's really hard to watch.
Yeah.
I regret smoking before I watched the movie last night, and I don't advise anyone do that.
No, I have
Don't-
smoked before watching The Lighthouse. That was a trip. That was
Well, that's at
yeah,
least it's funny.
yeah. That's an interesting one. But yeah, no, I think that the I think it's like you said, a very strong choice. And then like the fact that there is a real witch and that we know that, right, plays into the family's paranoia moving forward, as defrosted robot in the chat is saying, which is also just like it I like it as an antagonist, an off-screen antagonist that's
Well,
there.
one of the really cool things about this movie is that they're witches and there's the devil,
Yes.
and they're just working together.
Oh
They're just
yeah.
on the same team, and I'm like,
You got to sign
that's
the
great.
devil's book to be a witch.
Yeah,
That's how the real shit works. We're not talking hocus pocus nonsense. No Agatha all along in this chat. Thank you
No.
very much. No,
Yes.
you are minions of Satan grinding up babies.
Well, there's something really interesting to be said for just actually having witches be monsters in this.
Yeah.
Because so many things, there's been this has happened to a lot of different types of villains and monsters in a lot of popular media in the past 10, 20 years, but it seems to happen most to anyone's that are women. Is that like, oh, what if they're just like misunderstood? And what if being a witch is
Dude,
actually just being powerful and independent and a feminist? It's like, no,
Dude, okay, so
stop.
when we went
Please
to visit
stop doing
Salem,
that. Yes.
when my girlfriend and I we did a road trip up to Salem and we went through the Witch Museum, right? They do that in the Witch Museum also. They're like, well, witches were probably real, but actually all they were was medicine women, and the doctors of the time, who were primarily men, didn't like that women were taking their business, so they demonized them and called them witches, and that was why witches became evil, like in the minds of the people. And I'm like, no, they were like a fucked up story that a bunch of bored and severely repressed minds came up with as a way to sort, like, it's a much more interesting thing than just like, oh yeah, the actual witches were just medicine women who knew herb lore. Like,
No,
no,
no.
no,
They're a symbolic vision of the like worst evil of femininity possible.
yeah,
That's like a femininity that is opposed to the natural world itself. And like I mean it's quite obvious that like at the end of this movie, for example, like what is the appeal that the devil gives to her? It's not like, oh, do you want to have a nice, happy, wonderful family? It's like, no, do you want to live a life of luxury and pleasure?
yeah,
Then you gotta, like, independent of family and country and society and everything like that. You just live in the woods and you kill babies, and like it's just like I don't know. It's annoying. It's annoying.
yeah,
I,
and
and
it's
like we've seen a couple examples of that recently. There's Agatha all along, obviously. There's even there's even Wicked, which I cannot understand why anyone would find the core story of Wicked appealing. It's like, oh, what if the evil witch from a child's dream was actually just misunderstood and people were mean to her because she was green? Like, shut up. She's an evil witch from a child's dream. Okay?
who dies when she gets baptized. All right, like that's literally that's
Like,
the
come on,
story.
guys.
But
We
no,
stop
actually, what she
doing
did
this.
was it was an elaborate magic trick so that she could go off and fuck the scarecrow, who was actually her boyfriend.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It
Yeah,
drives me nuts. I'm
it,
sick of it. Like, it to the point. It's to the point where it's super refreshing to watch, um, like Puss in Boots to The Last Wish, and like Jack Horner is just evil. He's just like actually evil. He's
yeah,
not misunderstood. He's not, whatever. He's just like, no, he's an awful, horrible person. You're like, oh, that's kind of refreshing because we don't see that as much anymore. I don't
yeah,
know. Watching The Witch, and I'm like, yeah, like this is what a witch is. This is, or like there are other ways you could go about telling a story of a witch, but like a witch is a monstrous creature. Like yeah, that's
yeah,
like how one of the best parts of, I think it's Buffy season 6. I don't want to spoil it too much, but like what happens with Willow,
yeah,
it's like, yeah, that's a witch. Like I'm kind of sick of this whole like, oh, witches are just independent feminists the whole time. That's all witches are. It's like, shut up, stop it.
no.
Anyway,
They
that's
weren't
not.
just old. They weren't just kindly old women who went off into the woods to become doctors. All right,
They're just, no.
no, no, not in the stories that were being told anyway. Not in the stories that that kept people awake at night. They made it's the quintessential like Faustian bargain, right? Like it's the
Yeah,
woman version of making a deal with the devil.
yeah.
You're not doing it for fame and like to learn to play the guitar really well, like at a crossroads or anything like that. What you're doing it for is beauty and freedom. Like you get to
Yeah.
fly for a sacrifice, and you get to do this, like, you live forever and you get to do incredible things, supernatural things at a particular cost that you then become willing to pay, right? That's far more interesting as a movie monster than to me, and as a horror device, and just as like as a view into what people were afraid of and what people warned against at the time. than it is to just kind of go like, well, what if they were just misunderstood, and it was really the fault of society?
I'm so sick of that trend. It's
There,
really
yeah,
nice to watch The Witch and be like, oh, yeah, that's what this is. That's what a story of a witch is supposed to be like. That's what the sort of horror of witchcraft emerged from. It's a sort of occult deal with the devil for power and
yeah.
independence that is opposed to the natural order of things. You know,
Yeah, it's a little
right?
interesting too, like how many people, especially if you visit Salem, Massachusetts, right? There's the Satanic Temple that you can go to have like, Tuesday tea time, and there's all like they'll have these pamphlets and these talks that are like, well, technically this isn't Satanism isn't about devil worship. Actually, it's more about nature and being one with the earth. As like, well, then don't call it Satanism. Like,
They're so Satanists are so unbelievably fucking cringe.
yeah,
Like they might be the most cringe people on the
literally
earth.
like the anime kids practicing jutsus in the corner, the girls who are like reading tarot cards and shit like that.
Yeah.
No, you're cringy. You're cringy and you're acting
Stop.
retarded.
Stop. Anyway, the witch. Yeah, so the witch is real and she's killing babies and then she's rubbing baby blood on herself and she's flying up towards the moon. It's great. It's a great little sequence. Um,
And fun thing too that I learned from the commentaries, that all of the supernatural scenes in this movie are shot at either 27 or 29 frames per second, in order to give them a little bit of a different sense of play without standing out too much in
yes.
comparison.
I did not know that, and that's an interesting thing. So basically what's happening there is, almost the entirety of the movie normally plays out at 24 frames a second. And so a few scenes are shot at 27 to 29 frames a second and then played back in a 24 frame timeline. So it's basically ever so slightly slow motion. Not enough to really notice, just enough to feel slightly different.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
oh god, like, well, and like you notice like some of the strange frame jumping when she's pounding the entrails of the kid in the, like, when you watch her body move as she's doing it.
Mm.
It's really creepy. It's a great effect. It's a very very cool
Yeah.
in camera effect.
Basically, it just slows things down slightly, but not enough to really notice that you're watching something in slow motion. It just feels like just slightly more dreamlike,
Yeah,
slightly more fluid. It's an interesting effect. Yeah, because I didn't notice it at all. I didn't feel it as anything different, but yeah, it's an interesting choice, especially if you have scenes and shots that don't have dialogue, because dialogue sync would be the weird thing. Because basically, if you're filming at 30 frames a second, for example, that's 80% the speed of normal. So it's slow enough to feel different, but not maybe enough that your mind really notices it. But if they were talking, that's when things would
yeah.
get
Then
weird.
you'd sort of notice
Yeah.
up on it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well, someone said you mean Snyder motion. No, Snyder motion is like shooting at like 120 frames per second.
or higher. Like
Unbearably
he's
slow.
done like 180
Oh,
in
I'm
some of his
sure.
shit
I'm
before.
sure he has. I'm sure he has because he's addicted to it and because it's a crutch.
Yeah.
I really hate him. I think his movies are awful.
Did I tell you? I'm going to go off on
Unbearable.
a brief tangent. Did I tell you that I actually like rewatched his Dawn of the Dead recently? The zombie one that he remade.
Yeah, I've never seen that one, but
Honestly, not the worst of his movies. I think that might be one of the better. There's some interesting stuff in like at work in that movie. There's a little bit more
sure.
comedy to it than I think the rest of his stuff tends to go in for. But it feels very much like him kind of coming in there and being like, "Oh, what if we did this like really edgy, like edgelordy shit, where like a guy ties his girlfriend who turned into his pregnant girlfriend who became a zombie to the bed while she gives birth to his zombie child." Like, and like it's very gross play, like full scene played out, and it's like it's effective. But I'm like, yeah, knowing where you're going after this in the many years to come after this, it's like, okay, yeah, I see where we started. I,
Yeah,
I see how this
interesting.
all began.
So, The baby is gone. We wake up the next day and things are not going well. The mom is caterwauling, essentially,
Yeah.
in grief constantly. Caleb gets up and he's sort of stepping over some of the other sleeping people as he's about to leave. And he sees Thomason and he kind of stops to like watch her
Watch your
chest
titties.
rise
Yeah,
and
yeah.
fall. Yeah, watch her titties a little bit. Well, it's something really funny about these scenes because she's not wearing anything even close to revealing, but it's just
He's
like
a horny
who
Puritan,
else
bro.
is he's he's going through puberty. She's the only person,
Sexually mature woman
yeah,
apart from his
exactly.
mom.
And that's all there is. And so he's just kind of like watching, and she's kind of having a dream that it's subtle and it's not super explicit, but the dream you could interpret her reaction as if she's having a sexual dream. It's unclear exactly. It could be sexual, it could be a nightmare. He interprets it as a nightmare and wakes her to be like, "Hey, don't worry," you know.
Yeah.
But like it's writing a weird line is what I would say in terms
Yeah.
of like
There's a
whether
lot.
she
There's a couple of scenes like that. Yeah.
yeah.
It gets a little strange.
Yeah, and so like that's a really interesting moment because she seems really unhappy to be woken up. That's kind of the
Yeah.
thing that makes me feel that way. So he wakes her up because he thinks she's having a nightmare, and she gives him this look like, "Why'd you do
Why would
that?"
you do that? Yeah. What are you doing, step
Yeah.
brethren?
Uh, and then he goes out and he finds his dad. His dad is already up, and he's sort of looking at the corn, noticing that like we're getting towards the end of the harvest. There's not a lot of corn left.
One of the craziest things about this too is at the end of the harvest, there's not a lot of corn, and the corn is not going. It's not going well for the corn, like because it shows
Yeah.
the scene of the rot on it, and
Yeah.
there's an interesting, like one of my favorite parts of the commentary, right, is he's just like, oh yeah, our set designer did a really good job getting the fungus right on the corn, and then I'm like, okay. Like he went there with the special effect, like he made it look really good, something that looks accurate. He goes, no, we had to buy like a whole bunch of corn and keep it in storage for long enough that it would start to rot. And that so we had to buy we filmed in March, and so we had to
Oh,
buy
like
all the
real.
yeah, it's like it's
Bunch of
just like, oh, so
small.
you just bought like puckloads of corn and just let it sit around for 6 months before you started shooting so that it would rot just the right amount. That's
Yeah.
that's commitment,
The
man.
attention to detail.
That's
The
pretty
commitment. Yes.
That's pretty impressive.
So Caleb goes out and sees his dad. His dad, I believe his character's name is William. We don't hear it much. Is that his name?
I think I'm pretty sure it's
I
William.
think it's William. Anyway, he says, "God give you morrow" to his dad. He says, "All are still abed, save mother." And he says, "No ease to rise on a gray day. The devil holds fast your eyelids."
I
And
agree.
then, yeah, it's true.
I
It's
say
true,
that to myself every fucking morning.
And then he says, "Should I wake them?" And he says, "No, let them be. Thy mother's not slept a night since." He says, "We can search no longer, Caleb. We cannot. If not a wolf that hungered have taken him yet. Let's to the wood. I've been allaying traps for a while now, even before this new misery." He says, "Within the wood." He says, "Will you not help thy father?" He says, "You and mother have always forbade us to set foot there. Caleb, our harvest cannot last the winter. We must capture our food if we cannot grow it. We will conquer this wilderness. It will not consume us. It will not consume us." It's really,
Love that
I
line. It's a great
love
line.
all the dialogue, but it's really interesting because this sets up another conflict that will emerge as we go on here, is that the mom doesn't want them going out into the woods, right? Makes sense. Spooky woods. But the dad's like, well, harvest not going well. We gotta go hunt. And we'll eventually learn that he took the mom's cup, a silver cup, a silver chalice that she got from her father, and sold it in order to buy traps to set in the woods so that hopefully they could have some more food.
Yeah,
Which is
and
really
you think about it too, because like he's going out there with the oldest son, who's not very old at all, but old enough to be a Puritan adult, right? This is like a
Yeah.
Puritan man at the time. And you think
Yeah.
about it, like this is a risky thing, like we're right
yeah.
on the edge here. If he goes out in that woods and runs into the witch, and the witch is like, feeling a particular way, and they both die, the whole family's dead, right? Like
Yeah.
this is we're already at a risk.
Yeah,
Like
they're right on the edge of death and the wild already, like right from the word go, essentially. I quite love. I mean, it makes sense, but I love that their house is like right on the edge of the woods. They're in a sort of clearing, but it's like the edge is right there. You know what I
yeah.
mean? I think that's a really strong choice as well. So then, as they're walking through the woods, preparing to go see if their traps have caught anything, he's testing them on his Puritan bona fides.
Yeah, he's giving him a theology lesson, which I think is a
Yes.
really this is a very strong way of getting across that sort of historical context to the characters. I
Oh yeah.
really, really like this. I think
How
it's
important it is to
yeah,
them. You know, the dad does this a lot later when things are going wrong and he's trying to break up an argument at dinner. He's like, "Caleb, why don't you read us some scripture?" You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's like all he has really. And he leans on it heavily. So he's asking Caleb to sort of, recite his creed essentially. And he says, yes, are thou then born a sinner? And he says, I was conceived in sin and born in iniquity. And what is thy birth sin? He asks. He says, Adam's sin imputed to me and a corrupt nature dwelling within me. And he says, well remembered, Caleb, very well. And canst thou tell me what thy corrupt nature is? He says, my corrupt nature is empty of grace, bent onto sin, only unto sin, and that continually. And then they have to be quiet because they have to check the traps and everything.
yeah,
But that's a really interesting one as well. And there's something so incredibly harsh about it because it's not, the line between good and evil runs down the heart of every man kind of thing. It's like, no, your nature is to be bent unto sin and only unto sin forever. And all your hope is that God will grant you grace. Like that's
yeah.
all there is. That's all there is to you, which is a really, that's a really harsh
Yeah,
worldview to have.
that is a tough thing for it's a tough thing for an adult to wrap their mind around, but like to be
Yeah.
teaching this shit to a kid is like wild, you like and for the kid to kind of like try to, and then, especially in the wake of the death of a baby brother
Yeah.
is I mean, it makes a lot of sense why this is a crisis moment for this group, like they're
Yeah.
at the right time that this would be a problem. And of course, you've got Thomason as well, who has broken every commandment, right, in thought.
Yeah.
She's got to be feeling something similar to that, like she's trying to
Hmm.
bring some levity and some lightness to the situation a little bit. You'll see it a little later when they meet at the brook. But
Yes.
then like that dark side, you get the feeling of her sort of just slipping into it because of how hopeless this general philosophy can seem.
Yeah.
And I don't know, man. Like I think he got a lot of really great performances in that vein out of
Yeah.
all of these actors.
Yeah.
Really
Especially, we haven't talked
impressively
about
good.
it too much, but the dialect,
Yeah,
especially, there's some really, really solid child acting performances in this movie, not least because they have to do this old period pseudo British American accent. It's very impressive, I would say. It's a very interesting accent to listen to as well.
yeah.
Um,
Especially in Ralph Ineson's voice. Yeah, like he has a gravitas in this particular accent. And I think his Yorkshire accent sort of slips out a lot in the stressful moments of his character, and that's something that I'm pretty sure he meant. Eggers mentions that Ralph Ineson brought that to the table, as like a subtle difference that you'll notice more. He like at when he's in more of a stressful situation, trying to figure shit out and talk shit out. He speaks more like like he's from England than he does with the general American accent, or like
yeah.
the other
Well, it's a
easier
kind of in-betweeny accent
in
from
yeah, to
already.
start with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so then we get the moment where Caleb starts to ask about Sam. Sam is the baby who died. He says, was Samuel born a sinner?" And he says, "How might then and he says, we pray he hath entered God's kingdom." And Caleb asks, "What wickedness hath he done?" He says, place faith in God, Caleb. We'll speak no more on thy brother. And he says, why? He has disappeared not only 1 week past, yet you and mother utter not his name. He says, he's gone, Caleb. He says, tell me, is he in hell? Because that's the main thing he wants to know. And he has
Yeah.
Caleb. He says, mother will not stop her prayer. And if he died, he said, if I died this day, and then like, so that he's spiraling,
Yeah.
right? Because he's like, well, if Sam was born in sin, he's just an innocent little baby, right? Why does like the cruelty and injustice he feels at the idea of his innocent little baby brother being in hell for not having done anything wrong? Like, how could he possibly have sinned? He's just a little baby, and he can't. He's struggling, putting that together with the like you're born into sin and only into sin kind of thing. And then he's like, well, he's kind of hoping his dad might say something like, it's like, well, surely God will have granted grace onto him,
And his
but he's
dad
like, I
won't
don't
say it.
know.
Yeah. His dad.
No, and he says, I don't know. No one can know. And it's like, God, and especially because Caleb's like, well, what if I died today?
Yeah.
Like, I would surely go to hell. Because I think they mentioned this later. It's kind of a subtle thing, but I think they said that Caleb hasn't been baptized yet.
Oh, I don't remember I don't remember that.
I think they mentioned that later because when they're talking about going back into town, because he doesn't want to have him baptized in that church with those,
Oh, okay.
false Christians.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that comes up later.
That would make sense. I don't remember. I didn't remember that. I know Sam hadn't been baptized.
Sam definitely hadn't, but neither has
okay, so
Caleb.
like then I guess you would have to assume then that like only Thomason has been, because like the twins are younger than Caleb, right? Yeah, so that's okay. That I didn't catch that before. That adds a whole other layer actually. That's
because basically he's like, if I died now, I'm going to hell. Like for sure I'm going to hell is sort of what's going through his mind, and he's trying to stick rigidly to his theological worldview for better and for worse, and he doesn't have a lot of good answers for Caleb in this scene. He just says like, don't worry about it. That's up to God. No one can know.
Well, I mean that's interesting too, because he is trying to cover a fault of his own pride in that sense, right? Like that he won't allow him to be baptized because he thinks he's the one who's correct.
Yes.
But that is causing this insane level of anxiety in his children, or like, to make them, like essentially they're like, well, fuck, like he's basically saying like, well, fuck, man, like we should get this taken care of, don't you think?
Yeah, among other things. Yeah. Specifically, what William says is, "Look, I love thee marvelous well," which is just a great phrase.
Great, yeah, dude. He has so many of those.
I know. There's a poetry to the dialogue in this movie. He says, "But 'tis God alone, not man, what knows who is a son of Abraham and who is not, who is good and who is evil. Fain would I tell thee Sam sleeps in Jesus, that thou wilt, that I will, but I cannot tell thee that, none can."
Not helping.
Not helping so much, dude. And you can tell Caleb is like trying to have let that help him, but he can only do so much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then the conversation turns to how he got these traps, and that's when he says that he traded his mom's silver chalice for them. And he says, "Don't tell mom. We'll tell her once we catch something with them." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She's overwrought already. I'll tell her when the grief is past. Let's not speak on this again. That's another one of the sort of sins that the dad commits here. In addition to his pride getting them into this horrible situation already, there's the added bit of lying and keeping things. And as Thomason will mention later, letting the mom think Thomason is responsible instead of admitting it. Like, I quite like when that comes up later. Anyway, the family dynamics in this movie are just incredible. There's lots of really good drama, for like spooky horror, witchcraft, a goat turning into the devil, stuff in the woods. All that stuff's great. But I think where the movie really shines is just like the family dynamics, just characters in rooms arguing with each other,
Yeah.
Really good stuff. So then
and examining the way that these situations like causes them to question the rightness of their actions, you know, like and that is something that really just like especially with the historical context kind of giving it a bit of separation, right? Like you can kind of separation from the
Mhm.
modern, you can kind of just like really enjoy this, so this sort of like it's not the primary focus, right? But it is there, and it is really like it makes it worth rewatching, you know,
Yeah,
even with its flaws. And I think that's a big win, you know, for a first feature for sure.
absolutely. So then we see the twins mucking about, playing with Black Phillip and singing a little song about Black Phillip.
Love it.
Um, the song goes, Black Phillip, crown grows out his head. Black Phillip, oh nanny queen is dead. Black Phillip, king of all. Black Phillip, king of sky and land, king of sea and sand. We are ye servants, we are ye men.
Yeah, yeah,
Black Phillip eats the lions from the lion's den. Black Phillip, a crown grows out his head. So one of the interesting things about this that you notice is like they're singing these little songs, and if you really think about the lyrics, you would be much more troubled by them. But they're just kind of like, that's just the kids being kids singing annoying songs. Like they're not really paying attention to what they're saying,
yeah,
you know? But the clues are already there from the beginning, right? That they serve Black Phillip. Black Phillip obviously is the goat, the he goat they have that is loose. And so the dad has to grab it by the horns and pull it and get it back into the little fenced in area where they're keeping it. And then he kind of slips in the mud as it happens.
yeah,
And yeah, so there's a lot of arguments all happening at once here. There's the where have you been all morning because they didn't tell the mom that they were going to go out into the woods to hunt. And so they're like, we're behind on our day's work. Where have you been? So they have to answer that question. Number two is that like Thomason, why haven't you been keeping after these kids? You know, like
yeah.
the twins, and they're like, they don't listen to me. They pay me
I
no mind.
I think one of the things too that I really like, one of my favorite parts about this scene is when you get the feeling, right? Like it, I don't, when you have siblings, you know, and you're young, you know, like there's always that like at the older sibling when they tell the younger sibling, like the parents will tell the younger sibling to do something, right? And then the older sibling will say like, yeah, do that, and then they'll go like, hey, you shut up, like you stop that, you know. It's like that's not your job, right? And I love that, like that's one of those moments that makes me laugh when I watch this because I'm like, yeah, that looks that like they're arguing like a real family, you know, like he
Yeah.
tells them, you know, be quiet, right? And they keep doing, and she goes, father said be quiet, and they go, Thomason, stop it. Yeah,
But also at the same time, why weren't you looking after them? And it's like, well, they don't listen to me. They don't listen to anything I say. And then she tries to tell them to do things, and they're like, shut up,
yeah,
Thomas.
stop trying to tell them to do things. What do you do? Like, yeah, it's you really understand the
The lose,
frustration.
lose. Yeah.
Yeah, like and her frustration, like it makes her very sympathetic, you know. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons probably why he didn't have her get distracted by a farm animal, you know, because
Yeah.
like that would make this very much more her problem, like her fault. In this
Sure.
case, like there's nothing she could have done about it, right? Like you see,
Yeah,
like
not
it was
really.
literally it's literally something impossible happened, and
Yeah,
so
she's
she
she's largely a victim of circumstance in this movie. The one thing that she kind of goes too far in is like messing with her sister and kind of putting the sort of like witchcraft stuff out there. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's like, oh, that's where the darkness comes out a bit. But for the most part, yeah, she's very sympathetic. Like, because her mom's pretty harsh on her.
yeah,
You
they all are. They're real, like
Yeah.
yeah. And
Um.
you get the
Go ahead.
guilt feeling from her and her performance too, like she's kind of trying to, I think that like she probably knows she shouldn't feel super guilty, you know, like on some level, because it like it
Yeah.
literally was not possible to stop. But you know that on the other level that the guilt is there, and you
Oh yeah.
can kind of sense that in the way she tries to interact with her family, and then
Yeah.
the way they hit her, you know, so consistently with, you know. blame for a whole bunch of other things. It kind of
At
just
least the
bleeds through.
mom,
Yeah,
especially. The dad, not as much until the question of whether she's made a deal with the devil comes up. Then he's a bit harsher on her, but otherwise, it's
yeah,
mostly the mom.
yeah.
Um, so yes, they're like, "Where have you guys been? We're behind on our work and everything like that." And then he doesn't really answer. And then the son decides to make up a story, to lie, saying that we went out looking for apples. I thought I saw some in the valley, but they weren't there. I'm sorry, it's all my fault. I thought it'd be a nice surprise to go get apples,
Yeah.
right? And it's just like, so he's protecting his father in that regard. And the dad lets him do it.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep, because he's not only is he super prideful, he's also a little bit of a coward.
a little bit,
A little bit.
yeah. And before he admits it, when she asks him about it, he just kind of is like, "What? A father can't spend godly time with his son?" Like, and then she's like,
Classic.
"Okay, you know, fine, fine. Do if it pleases you, whatever." Um, so that's that argument in a nutshell. We don't need to go all through the lines there, but then Thomason is sent to the brook to wash her father's clothes because he slipped in the mud while trying to put Black Phillip back in the pen. And
Hurt himself pretty badly in that scene,
yeah,
too,
he
apparently.
kind of fell pretty hard on his ass. Oh, in real life, you
Yeah,
mean?
in real life he hurt himself pretty badly. I think that was one of the ones where like like they had to do it a few times and the goat like actually headbutted him a few times.
Yeah.
Like they
Oh,
couldn't
yeah.
get yeah.
I think I heard he broke a rib or something
Yeah, throughout
at
the
some point.
yeah.
I've also heard, I think from the Team Deacons interview, that Robert Eggers is like, "Don't try to make a movie with a goat. I don't recommend it."
He says in the commentary track, he's just like, I don't know if you can train a goat. It doesn't seem like it's possible. I don't think like he's like the raven from later on. That bird was really well trained. They
Yeah.
listened to
Oh,
everything.
yeah. That's
You can do
hard to
that.
tell.
The dog, the horse, great. The goat, don't just. It's not. It doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
They're-
Well, so people got injured trying to handle the goat. That's pretty funny. But then apparently in the original script, I kind of glanced over it to see how different it was from the final movie. At the very end, he initially wrote it such that she's riding naked on the back of the goat out into the woods. And then clearly at some point they were like, that is not possible.
that's not gonna work.
We cannot do that. I don't know how far along into the process it took them to realize that that wasn't going to happen, but it's kind of funny that that's how we scripted it originally. Now at the end, she just walks out and the goat's sort of like running alongside her.
There are a lot of comments about things that he had to change from the script. Like and the details that he mentions, right? Like when he was like talking about in the woods, is like, well, I wrote it that it was supposed to be birch trees because I really wanted it to be like paper white, on the bark and
Yeah.
everything. But we couldn't find a forest with birch. We tried for a really long time, but we couldn't get a birch forest, so we ended up getting these poplar trees. But poplar trees, they sort of look like birch, but then when it rains, they turn black instead of white, and so it completely changed everything that I wanted from the thing. And I'm just like, dude, that's like, that's it's a crazy level of detail to
Yeah.
like, yeah. But it is interesting.
Well, I know it takes place in New England, and he originally wanted to film it there, but for tax purposes,
They
they
had to
filmed it
go
in
to
Canada.
Ontario, yeah.
Yeah.
Fucking Canada.
um. So, yeah, Thomason is sent to go clean off her dad's clothes at the brook, and
But then
so then
Caleb is
comes
sent
to
for
get a pail of
water.
water. Right,
Yeah.
he's sent for water. He comes up
While
and
Ralph chops wood. Apparently he
yeah,
was doing that a lot to get in shape for the movie, and so got
the
really
wood
good.
chopping scenes are fun. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like the way he cuts on the cuts.
It's pretty fucking impressive. Yeah, he's good at it.
Oh yeah, well, no, I meant the editing, but yes, I like the way we cut out of those scenes
Oh
on
yeah.
on the
Yeah.
chops. But yeah, no, he's good at it. Um, so Caleb is sent for water, and Caleb is in a weird mood, right? Obviously, he just had a pretty harrowing conversation with his dad. He checks out Thomason once again, and she kind of notices him doing it, but doesn't quite clock what he's doing. He's like, "What's wrong with you? What's going on with you?" And he's kind of embarrassed and he doesn't say anything. And she's like flicking water at him, like, "Caleb," and he's like, "Stop it!" What's wrong with you?
It's your
Like, what's the
problem,
matter?
dude.
Like, come here, come
Stand up
here.
right now. Stand up right now and walk over here.
And he says, "Come hither," and he kind of walks over, and he kind of lays down on her, and she's kind of comforting him. It's a nice little moment. I like it. And he's like, "What's the matter with thee?" And she says, "I've seen no apple since we went from England. I wish thou hadst found them. I so wished for one." And then they hear something in the brush, and they're like, "What was that?" So Caleb stands up to like prepare for whatever animal it could be. And then it's one of the twins. I forget their little names, Dipshit 1 and Dipshit 2. And she's like, "I be the witch of the wood." Oh, it's Mercy. That's
Mercy,
the name.
yeah.
Mercy. It's like Mercy, come out. It's like, "I be not Mercy, I be the witch of the wood, and I have come to steal ye. Hear my stick a flying through the trees. Clickety clackety, clickety clackety."
Clickety clackety. Love it. Kids doing a great job. She also like I really like how her costume makes her look like a very small, like a tiny version of an old woman.
Yeah, more than anyone I've ever seen in a movie, they actually look like a medieval painting of a child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Thomason's getting pissed, and then she starts her her little.
Oh, I love some of this dialogue. I'm just going to read through it because it's just so good. "Whyest when thou dost a wrong, I be a washing father's clothes like a slave, and thou art playing idle." It's because mother hates you. She says, "Spoiled child. I'll tell mother you have left the farm alone. Black Philip saith I can." She's like, "Black Philip saith I can do what I like." She says, "Devil take your Black Philip." It's like, "It's your fault I cannot leave the yard. I could go back to the brook before you let the witch take Sam." And like, so, Mercy's being a real cunt for a kid. Yeah.
Well, she's being encouraged by that no good fucking billy goat.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, it was a witch. It was a witch, Mercy. It's like, "You speak aright." And then she says, "It was I." So Thomason has decided, it's like, "Oh yeah, you want to talk about a witch all the time?" It's like, "I'll give you a witch." And she says, "Yeah, I'm a witch." It's like, "'Twas I that stole him. I be the witch of the wood." And Mercy's like, "Liar." It's like she's starting to get scared. And she's like, "I am." Like, listen not. And then Caleb's like, "Don't listen to her. Like, please." Come on, Thompson, please, like, stop fucking with your sister. But I love the way she says this. She slips into it really easily, which is really fascinating to me. She says, "I am that very witch. When I sleep, my spirit slips away from my body and dances naked with the devil. That's how I sign his book." Which is really interesting because it kind of implies that she has been having these dreams.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because that is exactly what happens in the movie.
Yeah, well, and that's how you become a witch.
Yeah.
Everybody knows this. It was one of the first books ever published. A guide on how witches get up to their bullshit.
Yeah.
This is why we got to burn more women.
He says, he bade me bring him an unbaptized babe, so I stole Sam and I gave him to my master, and I'll make any man or thing else vanish I like." She's like, "No." She says, "Aye, and I'll vanish thee too if thou displeaseth me." That's a tongue twister.
Yeah, the more you try to read it out loud too, the more you realize exactly how impressive it is that these actors were able to read it like.
It makes it sound very natural.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, "Perchance I'll boil and bake thee, since we are lack of food."
Yeah, and then she like grabs her and starts like tickle fighting and everything, and she's like screaming.
"How I crave to sink my teeth in thy pink flesh. If ever thou tellest thy mother of this, I will witch thee and thy mother." And Jonas too. "Stop thy tears and swear thy silence. You will not tell mother and father."
Yeah.
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 It's great.
And like Kevo was saying in the chat there, classic older sister moment for sure.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. God, I love this dialogue so much. It's just so fun. I love the way sentences were constructed back in the day. It's just really, it can be tricky to say if you're not used to it, but like the way they add words where you don't expect and where they drop them where you don't expect. But it's really good. And of course, Caleb's like, why are you doing that? Like, why would you say such horrible things? She's like, "Dost thou hate me too?" there's a wolf that stole Sam, and she's like, leave me alone. Go tell go tell mother and father of my wickedness. And it's really interesting because he's like, what? That's a horrible thing to do. It's like, oh, you hate me now too, just like everyone else, huh? And he's like, what is happening? Poor Caleb. Yeah,
This poor kid getting pushed this way and that. Yep.
Yeah.
Good
Good.
stuff, man. Good stuff.
Is it nighttime now? I believe we're in the house and they're having grace.
Yeah, having a prayer.
Yeah. I'm tempted to basically just read through the entire movie because it's that good. I will try not to do that, but just this dialogue is great.
But I love the way that they do the lighting for it, right? Like,
oh yeah. With the candle, this kind of one crooked or like diagonal in there, which is interesting. But yeah, this whole interior night scene is all candlelit. So it looks really nice. It feels very, like you're actually there. We're not faking it, so we can see better. Like there's some pretty deep shadows cast about the room, and I like the sort of flicker of the candles on the face. It's really nice. Got a nice sort of orange glow to these scenes. This is a movie that, despite being a little more desaturated than I would like, I quite like the color in general. Like the sort of warm orange glow of the nighttime scenes and the sort of blue cast that everything else has.
Yeah, I do like a lot of the composition too, with the natural lighting. Like, I think we jumped over it, but to go back just a little bit, like right after they leave the plantation, before they find their new home, and they're all bowing and praying and giving thanks for having been granted this rather desolate looking piece of land to have call their own. There's a scene where they're in the woods and they're all sitting by a campfire, and it looks like a painting you might find in in a museum of early New England settler kind of. It's darker on the outsides than you get from the Barry Lyndon compositions, so it's not quite as sweeping and everything. The focus
moodier.
It's a lot moodier. The focus is drawn more to the left side and to to the smaller aspect. Gives the sense of them being alone in this kind of scary, harsh world, with only a small bit of light to keep them going or to keep them safe. And I really like the way that he does the lighting in the indoor night scenes that way as well.
The compositions, like you said, like many of them feel like paintings. There's especially the wide shots of the whole homestead. There's a few, like when they go to bury Caleb later, that particular shot, there's a big wide shot we hang on for a while there that's very... Oh, it's on screen right now, or at least when I'm looking at it.
I saw it there. And Donald's angry and Jay Jameson are talking too. Like there are too many candles, probably, and I think Robert Eggers mentions this in the commentary as well. It's like for accuracy, that the family burns way more candles than they probably would have. But in order to get...
That's a man. We got to get a proper exposure.
Look, I do not want that ISO grain showing up like it does in the when Netflix movies shoot at night and they try to only use firelight. I do not want that shit in this, and I'm glad that he decided.
You got to find the balance, right? You got to find the balance.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then the dinner time scene, you can tell they don't have much to eat. I believe they're only eating bread. I think that's all they have.
Yeah, it's like unleavened cornbread. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but then an argument emerges because the mother is like, hey, Thomason, have you seen my silver cup? He's like, is it not on the shelf? And she's like, no. It's like, well, is it over here? And she's like, no, it's disappeared. It's like, did you lose it? She's like, no, I haven't touched it. And the mother is like, it was definitely Thomason, right?
Yeah, she's like zeroed in, like this.
Oh, she's zeroed in on her for sure, because who else would have taken it? And the dad does not say anything.
Yep,
he does not say anything. He basically is like, she said she doesn't have it, Catherine. She says she didn't touch it.
Yeah, he tries to change the subject in a very ineffective way. It's not going to make it better, William.
No.
You're not making anything better.
Just tell the truth, man. Come on. but then the mom starts freaking out, like,
I just think it's crazy that she like okay. I just think it's crazy that you would look at my silver cup and touch it and
hmm I've caught thee trifling with it before. Like, how thou couldst lose my father's silver wine cup in this hovel I cannot know. And she's like, did a wolf vanish that too? Like,
oh
oh,
dude.
dude, that's fucked up, man. But I mean, like, you can tell the deep down, she's like, she blames her a little bit.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean
That
that's
she
it
wasn't
coming to the
there, and so
surface right there.
yeah, and she's like, oh, how could you possibly have lost Sam? You know what I mean? And so when she mentions that, it's like, Jesus Christ. It's like, this poor girl. Especially because there's a lot of dramatic irony in this movie. Obviously, there's the dramatic irony that we know there's a witch when they're not quite sure of it yet. There's the dramatic irony that we know what happened to the cup and that we know the dad's not admitting to it. And so we can feel especially bad for Thomason because we know she didn't take it. And so we're just like, God, this poor girl, her mom just like blames her for everything. And she's
Yeah.
like, what is amiss on this farm? It's not natural. Like
Yeah.
something's
There's a
she
curse
I kind
lingering over this
yeah.
place.
Yep. Absolutely.
Maybe it's all the unbaptized children.
Yeah.
You're
Maybe
basically
it's all
hanging out a eat at Joe's sign for the witches at that point.
for the devil. Yeah. And there's a really interesting thing. So eventually she's like, Thomason, I thought I told you to go take care of the goats or whatever and stuff like that. And then as they're going to bed, the mother kind of lays on the dad and she says, you must sleep tonight, Kate. Thou dost remember I love thee. And she says, I do. And he says, listen to me, Kate. I fear thou lookest too much upon this affliction. We must bend our thoughts towards God, not ourselves. He hath never taken a child from us, never a one, Kate. Who might earn such grace? We have been ungrateful of God's love. She's like, he's cursed this family.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, it's like he hath taken us into a very low condition to humble us and to show us more of his grace. And she says, was not Christ led into the wilderness to be ill met by the devil? And she says, we should never have left the plantation. It's like, yep, here it is. It's coming out.
How long are you going to hold that over my head?
Yeah.
Yeah, I that's an interesting. I do like that line a lot too because you can kind of get the idea of how like of the genesis sort of the story, right? Is like a Puritan
Mhm.
family, holier than thou kind of thing, goes out into
Mhm.
the wilderness and like Jesus met by the devil, right? Like, and I
Yeah.
I love too how you can like how she does this a lot through the movie, the mom, where she like will constantly reassess the story in things and like try her she's very pessimistic, right? Like she does a lot to make things sound bad when there are like it's great how her character
Mhm.
makes that happen because like when Caleb eventually will succumb to his witchy injuries, she has that moment where she's just like, no, like, yeah, he said something about Jesus and all that, but the devil speaks in scripture too. It's like you just can't be happy with anything.
I mean, it's hard to
It's
blame her,
hard.
but yeah,
Yeah, no, it's like
she is she is struggling to look on the bright side in any
yeah,
of these situations. The dad is very clearly, but he's kind of a hypocrite about it
yeah,
because the dad is like, oh, but we're so blessed. I mean, like, why should we deserve any of this? Like, that we've only lost one child is a blessing, so we should be happy. And the mom's like, no, you cursed us by making us leave the plantation. This wouldn't have happened if we were still there. I don't want to be here. This is all your fault. Like, she doesn't say that explicitly, but that's what's happening. And of course he's trying to like say like, no, like we shouldn't. He's trying to be positive and he's trying to be grateful while at the same time excusing the fact that like it's really his pride that's put them here in this situation, right?
yeah,
And then there's this one moment where he has a pretty cruel line he says to her and he says, what does he say? He's like, "What need we? Silver chalices?"
Ooh,
Like,
yeah,
and she says, quite rightly, she says, "How dare you chide me on a cup? 'Tis not for vanity that I am grieved of it."
yeah,
Because we've established that it's a gift from her father, who one assumes is dead in this time period, or at the very least is it back in England, right? And so she's like, "No, it means more to me than just vanity. Like, how dare you?"
yeah.
You know?
I'm not mad because I like it's not because I like having pretty shit in the house. She's just
Yeah,
like, no, it's like something that I cherish that my father gave me. You asshole. Like, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Because it was mentioned by Topaz Dude that part of the irony of the dad is that he's so outwardly committed to these principles and these ideals, but he's also the most like sinful of the bunch,
yeah,
essentially. You know, except for maybe the kids,
yeah. The
but fuck
kids,
the
but
kids.
they were
They're kind of corrupted by the devil a little bit. But yeah, like he's a liar and he kind of hides his lie for longer than he should out of cowardice and pride and all that. And, like he admits to it later. There's a great scene of him alone talking to God and he admits his prideful nature. And part of you when you watch it, you're just like, "Oh, he admitted it. Can things go nice now, please?"
yeah.
But no, it's too late. Like, you know,
Nope.
everything's going to shit. Um, Anywho, so so then they're talking about what they're gonna do because like Thomason's getting older now. Like she should probably go serve another family. So there's a lot of things factoring in here. There's the because this is when they mentioned that Caleb hasn't been baptized either. Like
Ah,
they're
okay.
looking ahead towards a rough winter. They have 7 mouths to feed. Thomason's getting up there in age. She should probably go serve another family, whether as like a servant as a worker or married off to another family, whatever the case may be. Caleb hasn't even been baptized yet. You know,
Yeah,
like they're trying to figure out what to do with them.
we
You
got
know,
no food. We got we got no food to keep us fed.
Mhm.
We got no we like is this the part where she's like they like call up to check if they're awake? Yeah,
Yes,
and of course the kids don't respond, but they are sitting up and listening to what's going
yeah,
on, getting the skinny on what's about to happen. I think one
yeah.
of
I
my
mean,
like
it's a small little house. Like, like, yeah, like you can hear everything they're saying.
yeah.
Kind of fun. Go ahead.
And yeah, it's a really well done, because it's a lot of high plot details, right, in this part of the like being delivered in this dialogue, and we get it all through the floor,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah,
like so it's a good job on the mix there,
yeah.
commending the audio techs, but yeah, like this is when they find out that like if we don't do something, we're gonna fucking starve. She's like, and
Yeah.
she says that like
Yeah.
the way she says it, like it sticks with me. Like it reminds me a little bit of Gollum. It's some like
Mhm.
in some way, but they're
Yeah.
like we got to get I don't know what we
Well,
like
here's the argument because some of the specifics are really interesting. So she says she's old enough, she must leave to serve another family. And then she says, "'Twas not her fault. Must tell thee, Kate, it was thine for taking thy family hither." That's the mom saying this. The dad's like, "This is godly land." And she's like, "Godly? Our children are being fostered up like savages."
yeah,
You know what I mean? Because she's like, what are we doing living alone on the edge of the wilderness like this? You know what I mean?
yeah, like look at these twins, look at those two.
Those fuckers. And she says, "How oft I begged and begged thee to take Samuel for baptism." And he says, "They'd not baptize outside the congregation." And she says, "Our Sam is in hell."
Yeah,
So she takes the much more pessimistic view on that question. Not that it's an open question, but yeah, he's definitely in hell because he hasn't been baptized yet. And then he says, "God save us, Caleb as well. We must keep him still, and Thomason." And she says, "That corn is trash.
yeah,
We cannot back to that church." And she says, "We will starve." It's
yeah,
like, and he's like, "Shut up, you'll wake them." Essentially, like, "Peace, peace, you'll wake them." "I'll to the village with the horse and Thomason tomorrow. The Tildons or the Whitings, they can make use of her. They are good folk. We will find food, I know it." Like, oh, things are not
Yeah,
going well for our heroes.
yeah, not looking great. And Thomason, of course, she doesn't want to do it. That's like, you know,
Yeah,
that's her thing. She doesn't want to go and work for another family
be a servant. Yeah,
and be a servant.
she doesn't want to be here either. She's
Yeah,
yeah,
which you could read that sort of as like her flaw, right? Her sin is that like she's not willing to put that, and why would she be, right? Good question. That's a great question, but she's not willing to put that, put what she desires aside for the sake of the family, right? Like she,
yeah.
and like again, you look at how they treat her, and you go, why would she feel? Why would she want to do that, right?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
so
his Topaz says something interesting that I want to respond to. He says the convo interests me in terms of what Eggers is trying to say. The idea of Thomason kind of being oppressed by the Puritan culture, accused of witchcraft, trying to pawn off her for marriage and whatnot. No wonder she chooses to go witch at the end. See, my problem with that is that she's not like oppressed any more than anyone else is here. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
like everyone is having just like I don't know. I don't think the point of the movie is that like patriarchal repression turns nice women into witches. It's like I don't think that's what we're saying here at all. It's like just the brutality and the horrible situation. There like it's not like patriarchal society is to blame here. He kind of takes them all away from society. You know what I mean?
yeah.
It's like
Well,
one
and
man's pride and then the harshness of the wilderness, but she's got the darkness in her from the beginning
yeah,
too.
I
So
was
like
gonna
I
say
don't
like
yeah.
her own, like she's got her own sense of pride, right? Like she's got her father's pride in her, right?
Yeah.
She won't, like she doesn't want to do what is required of her, basically, right?
Yeah.
And so she tries to do everything, like she basically does whatever she can not to let it happen.
Yeah.
And that because she wants to live deliciously,
Yeah.
as it's
But I
put
mean like
later.
the idea of just being a servant for another family is just like a fact of life in this time period, you know what
Yeah,
I mean? And she's, doesn't want anything to do with that because she's got a little bit of her own sense of pride at like what she wants to do and what she thinks she deserves as well.
yeah. And so Caleb, in order to avoid this fate, Caleb and Thomason, or Caleb hatches a little scheme. He's going to take the horse out to the
Yeah.
woods to check the traps, and he's going to take that
Yeah.
gun that is way too fucking big for him out to
Yeah.
the woods.
Well,
Uh,
I just love the imagery of him with his father's oversized gun.
yeah,
Like
no, it's
he
great.
sort of,
I love it. It
yeah.
looks really. I mean, look, it makes for some really great shot, and he would
Oh
have
yeah.
at this time, right? Had to do stuff like that.
Well, it's also there's just something there of like him sort of trying to carry around his father in a sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he's it's too much for him to bear in a sense. It's like too much for him to carry.
And
Um
trying to like, and it's an outsized responsibility that he has to take
yeah,
on essentially
mhm,
because his father is
because his
failing them.
father's pride.
Yeah,
Right. And his father's pride and ego is a big giant phallic gun. You know? Like
yeah,
it's just little stuff like that. And like trying to walk through like thorny thickets and trees and stuff like that while carrying this gun. It's good stuff.
yeah,
Good stuff. Anyway, but yeah, he tries to go off before the sun's up to go check the traps because he's trying to take on responsibility and like, oh, well, maybe if I can, she's kind of for, I don't know if my dad would go back into the woods at this point, but I will, and I'll go and I'll see if we can get any food, and then we'll come back and then we might have something to eat. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And so, but Thomason's like hears him get up, and it's like, where the fuck do you think you're going? And he's like, don't worry about it. I'm not going to tell you where I'm going. And it's like, go back to sleep. If you're silent about this, you'll not need to serve the Tildens or anybody else. Like, if I get food, enough stuff, we'll be all right, and they won't make you leave to go be a servant for another family. And he's like, and she's like, well, let me go with you. It's like, no, you can't come with me. It's like, oh yeah, well, I'll tell if you don't. Like a lot of the sibling stuff feels very real, and that's a good example of that. So then they go off into the woods, and the sun's starting to come up, and they're arguing. And she's like, "Yeah, we did." And he's like, "Nuh-uh." He's like, "We did." And he's like, "We had glass windows in England. You haven't been here so long that you forgot that, have you?" and she's sort of reminiscing on what she remembers of her early childhood in England, that he is too young to remember. And like obviously she remembers the before times, in a sense, before they
The
lived.
before
So she,
four. Yes.
yeah. And so there's a sense in which, like, it sounds like they had glass windows, they had a nicer place, they were with their family, they had apples, they had, luxuries that they do not have here, even before they went out off alone at the edge of the wilderness. Like,
Yeah.
So she remembers slightly more luxury that they gave up in order to sort of live this idealistic Puritan lifestyle and make a new world for themselves. Like, so she is kind of more poised to be resentful about not having that anymore than Caleb or any of the younger kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And
And
so that's factoring into her being like, no, I deserve to live deliciously.
yeah, it's the Van Lifer YouTube child problem, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And I like her like having these fond memories of like the dog laying on the floor in the sun and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then Caleb's just like, I don't remember that. So she's kind of alone in longing for that as well. Because the only other person who longs for their life back in England is her mother, but she's so disconnected from her mother at this point,
Yeah.
they can't share that together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
It's driving more
and
wedges between the family
yep,
members, which yeah,
yep. And
works
so,
for some great drama. Well, and then Fowler, the dog, or they check one of the rabbit traps. They find a rabbit, right? So like, there's
mhm,
some success, you know.
yeah.
Um,
So they're feeling pretty good about it.
yeah.
Yep.
And then as they keep going, they see the other rabbit, the one that has like the Black Phillip eyes, which I love the touch of,
Right.
right? Like
We forgot to mention this earlier. The first time we're introduced to this rabbit is when he's out hunting with his dad. They try to take a shot at the rabbit, who has the very spooky eyes. And the gun kind of jams and misfires and kind of blows up in his face, and they do not get the rabbit.
devil magic.
Um, Devil magic. Later, before the scene we're on right now, there's a brief moment where Thomason goes out to the barn where the goats are to make sure that they're put to bed, and there's a rabbit in there, just sitting in there being creepy. Um, so that's what we've seen of the rabbit so far. We see that same rabbit again, and it, very much clear that it's the same rabbit. And they
The dog like goes off after it. It like
well, yeah, at first it spooks the horse, which is an
yeah.
interesting detail because rabbits don't typically spook horses, but it spooks this one. And the Fowler goes running off after it. Caleb goes running after Fowler and says, "Wait here," but the horse is spooked, so the horse starts freaking out and jumping around and running and tosses Thomason off of its back, and she thuds on the ground and loses consciousness.
Yeah.
So a whole bunch of bad shit all went bad really quickly because man, things spiral pretty badly out of control right after this.
We're
This is
done.
this is like, because I mean it's amazing because what I like about it is how precarious their whole situation is. Like and that's a sort of realistic thing. Like the horse gets spooked, the dog goes running after something, they get split up, and then they're lost in the woods. And that can fucking end you,
Yeah.
at this point. And, I mean, that's how precarious life is for these people. So they're split up. Caleb is running after the dog, calling out after it. I really love the detail of him trying to whistle with his fingers, but he can't
Yeah,
do
he
it.
can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I really like that part too.
his voice is kind of hoarse from yelling too much. Like that's an amazing detail, and it kind of adds to the helplessness that he's in. You know what I mean? He's looking for Fowler, can't find him. Meanwhile, Thomason wakes up. The horse is gone, and she's just alone in the woods now. And then we're kind of cross-cutting between the parents.
The parents
Yeah.
like looking for him.
Like,
Jonas
where
and
did they
Mercy
go?
are tied to the
like,
fence with leashes and bells.
That's such a great detail. Like I'm not losing you two either. You guys are tied to the fence. You're not going anywhere. And so they're off looking for them. And then let's follow Caleb's story. So first, Caleb is kind of moving through the woods. It's getting dark. He's got the oversized gun. He eventually finds Fowler. Fowler has been killed.
Yeah.
Or died.
Mortally wounded. Yeah, it's like it's
Mortally
fucked.
wounded. Yeah, Fowler is dead. R.I.P. Fowler. You were a good boy. Um, so then he's wandering through the woods. It's starting to get dark out, and he's definitely lost. He eventually finds his way to a house in
Yeah,
the woods.
a little house in the woods. He
Little
crawls
little
through a
house.
thicket, and it's kind of interesting because Robert, like,
Yes.
there are two
Yes.
scenes in this movie where Robert Eggers mentions recurring nightmares that he has. One of
Yeah.
them is when Caleb is crawling through the thicket. He says that he has recurring nightmares of doing that, right? Of like,
Interesting.
and then another one is when later on the witch shows up in the barn. He has recurring nightmares of like slowly walking towards an old crone who has her back turned to him, and then she turns around and it's really spooky, and he wakes
Yeah.
up. So that's a very interesting set of dreams from the guy that he translated into the movie.
Yeah. Well, I love. Okay, he's wandering through the woods, but then before he finally gets to the witch's house, essentially, he's actually like crawling through
Yeah,
thicket.
I
Like
love
that's
that.
a great. That's just perfect symbolism right there. And he makes it through, and then he finds a house, and it's like, oh my gosh, relief. Warmth, comfort, shelter. It's not home, but it's something. And then who emerges from the house in a slightly slower frame rate than a pretty woman?
Literal Victoria's Secret model from Australia.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's funny.
literally a Victoria's Secret model from Australia comes out of the house, and like the kid is just like he's you. The thing that I like about that choice, right? And he doesn't mention this or anything in the commentary, but the, everything else in the movie is set up very historically accurately, right? Like everybody
Yeah,
kind of like, I mean, granted they look a little more clean and polished than they probably would.
a
They're
little bit. Yeah,
but they're very plain, kind of just like down to earth, sort of Puritan. Like you can buy the Puritan look, and then this very modern, beautiful woman comes out of this house, and it is at like both fascinating and off-putting. And you
yeah,
imagine being like a Puritan kid, like if I'm taking this like in this context, right? Like a Puritan kid on the cusp of puberty, like checking out his sister's boobs, and like sneaking a glance
yeah.
of his sister's cleavage in the morning, right? And then
Hmm.
a modern beauty standard model emerges from a house at your darkest moment. Like that
Hmm.
is that like I can only imagine that would be both like fascinating and horrifying at the same time, like very uncanny and off-putting, because that
Yeah,
is like got to be the most beautiful woman the kid's ever seen in his life,
yeah.
right? He's seen what, three,
Hmm.
and they're all his family. Like,
Well, he was old enough to
yeah,
remember the village, but still.
yeah, still,
And she's also dressed very extravagantly.
yeah,
He's not dressed like a Puritan. Obviously, she's wearing something like period attire from a different place. You know what
yeah,
I
like a
mean?
little Red Riding Hood costume almost.
Yeah,
Like it's
exactly.
interesting.
There's a sort of corset or something like that involved. Anyway, someone mentioned that some people find this scene controversial because she kisses the kid on the lips. It's
Yeah,
funny. I
it's
never considered it like that,
the kid was
because
apparently very nervous about doing it. It was his first kiss ever.
yeah,
And he had to walk up and kiss a Victoria's Secret model. But
yeah,
apparently he was like, because he was a soccer kid. He was like I think Robert Eggers mentioned that like when he was in school, he would have been bullied by this kid, like the type of kid that this kid is. And so like afterward, apparently he started bragging to his friends. Like he would call his friends and be like, "Guess what I did today?"
So he was a bro, is what you're saying.
Yeah, he's a little lad. He's a soccer
Yeah.
player.
Yeah, so yes, so he approaches the house and she emerges and she walks up to him and then she gives him a kiss on the lips, and then the only part of this I don't quite like is the like spooky hand that like she grabs his head with. It's like a little,
A
I
little
don't
on
know.
the
I don't know.
nose. A little
I
on the
don't know if
nose.
that was necessary. You could have just ended
I
right
do like
there.
that they did it. Practically they just hid the old woman under the coat and then kind
Yeah.
of filmed around it, so at least it looks like a real like a real old woman's hand. It's like, you know, but
Yeah.
yeah, a little bit on the nose.
It's a little cheap. Just a little. It's fine.
Another one of those like we're doing this for horror movie.
Yeah, that's a moment that feels very modern horror movie.
I think that
where
kind of tends to be like I think most of my complaints about the movie are when it leans into that, when it goes just a little
a little
too
basic.
hammy, into the modern horror movie thing. Like we got to give the modern horror audience what they want, kind of thing. Teenage
But
butts and seats
even
moments.
then, they probably think the movie's boring.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So like,
Although perhaps worth mentioning briefly, this movie did very well. This movie, I think it was something like 40 million on a $4 million budget. So
pretty fucking good.
pretty good. That'll set you up for success. Anyway, yes. So then and then we cut to black. We'll return to Caleb later. Meanwhile, I think it's just Thompson's wandering through the woods, and eventually she runs into her father. Right? Isn't that?
Yeah.
Was there anything in between for her? I can't remember.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so. Yeah. And then, so like, others, I won't read through it, but there's an interesting prayer he recites to himself, Caleb, that is, when he's wandering through the woods alone. But yes, she runs into her dad and he says, "Where is thy brother?" And then we're back in the house essentially, and now we're arguing more about what should be done. And the dad is like, "I'll leave at first light." You know what I mean? I don't care that it's raining because it's raining now.
Yeah.
And he's like, "I don't mind the rain. It bothers me not. I'm gonna go look for him." And the mom, Kate, is like, "I can't have you leave me too."
Yeah.
You know what I
Because
mean?
he's about to go he's like gonna go off into the woods, and this is when you really start to realize that like if he goes, then, and she says this like, is Jonas gonna be the man of the house? Because like that kid is the only the only one who would be the only guy left essentially, and this is the time when that mattered. So
yeah. And then there's like, well, I can go to the town to the village to raise up help. And she's like, it's a day's ride, and like you don't have a horse.
Yeah.
He's like, well, there's no time to be lost, all that sort of stuff. And it's like, you don't have a gun, you don't have a dog, like, don't be a fool. And then he's like, well, I need to go find him. And then she's like, I'm not gonna lose you too. I'm like, we're totally fucked if you're gone.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if you can hear my dog barking in the background, but it's been a little butthole. Hold on, you keep going. Just a second.
He's mourning Fowler, the poor lad. But yeah, so they have another argument going on about what they can do, and this is, I think, the moment. I probably should wait for him to come back so that I can be totally sure about this, but I'm pretty sure this is the moment where it's finally revealed that the silver cup was traded for the traps, and everything. Kind of all it just keeps spiraling for them. They're really in a bad mood. Imagining if Mike Flanagan had made that scene, that's that'd be rough, these dialogue scenes would have like a long breakdown of what the silver cup meant, how she got the silver cup from her father, and everybody would just kind of sit there watching it, nodding along silently as she explains why why it's not pride and vanity that makes her want her silver cup back. It's really that her father, all this memory that she has with her father. And that would I would not be thrilled.
I'm back. What would you not be thrilled about?
Mr. Redhead in the chat mentioned like if you didn't like the old person hand, just think how the scene would have been if Mike Flanagan was making this, and I was just imagining the scene where the mom explains not just that it's not vanity that she wants, that makes her want her father's silver cup back, but it's all this memory, like this one time that he took me to Piccadilly Circus when I was young, and he held my hand and walked through blah 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 blah, and everybody just sits around looking at her and nodding, and just sort of letting it go on and on and on. Would not quite the dramatic conflict that we're about to get when he reveals that there were traps. Like, the reason Caleb went out there is because there were traps, and where did he get the traps? Well, by selling the cup.
Well, one of the things I like about this movie, as distinct from other things that can be too monologue-y or too talky, I would say, is that there's the dialogue. There's a lot of dialogue in this, but it doesn't just go on and on and on. There is a sort of economy of speech
Yeah.
in this movie. You know, we say a lot in few words. And even the scenes with like a lot of dialogue, like the one when Caleb returns, we'll get to that one in a bit. There's a lot that's said there, but it's not nearly as verbose as it might be in another writer's hands. It's like we're saying it as quickly as we can, essentially, as efficiently as we can.
Yeah.
And I quite appreciate that. It's good. So then they're not sure what to do. This is when he admits that I took thy father's cup, that he sold it.
Yeah.
And then the wife is like, I knew you were false.
Yeah.
It's like, I did it for you. It's like, you took him to the wood. You're a liar. Like, she's focusing on the negative.
Yeah. As women do.
Understandable. Uh-huh. He's like, I'll go now. And she says, you cannot escape the wood. She says, he says, I will find him. And he's like, what? And kill thyself too? Will Jonas be the man of the house? I quite like that line too.
Yeah.
Will you damn all your family to death? Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think this finally sort of ends with like
Thomason goes to take care of the goats.
Well, they have a moment here. This is like where Thomason and her mother finally get a moment of tenderness with each other. I think it's one of the only ones in the movie, really, where like we see that there is some affection between the two of them, because they've calmed down a bit. She's won her argument, right? She's convinced him not to go out, and that they'll look, in the morning. And she's sitting with the twins, and she's got a more motherly atmosphere about her at the moment. They're napping with her and everything. And Thomason, who is like kind of in the corner, right? She asks if the goats have been bedded down. She goes, "Oh, don't worry about that." Like, you can kind of tell that she feels a little.
Let it wait till tomorrow.
Yeah, she feels a little bad maybe for having blamed Thomason in this immediate aftermath. She's like, "Oh, why did I think you did that?" And she calls her over, and she grabs her face. She kisses her on the forehead. It's the only moment really of any motherly maternal affection that we see between those two characters. And then Thomason goes out to bed the goats down, and she finds naked Caleb clinging to the
leaning up to the fence.
He's made it home. He got out. He escaped.
That's such a great shot, by the way. The shot of him, like the way he's leaned up against the fence. It's just a really strong composition. And so Caleb is back. He's naked as the day he was born, in the pouring rain. And so obviously he's very, it's pretty late in the year. He's freezing, right? So then they set him up in the house. They have candles and everything, and they're trying to wrap him up, trying to warm him up, and he's not doing well. And then there's a really interesting moment where they forget what they call it. They do some bloodletting.
Yeah, bloodletting. They're trying to bleed the madness or the fever from his temple.
Yeah,
and I love this. Okay, so this scene, she's like, it doesn't quite come through, and I think the commentary really adds a little bit to it, right? Like maybe a closer shot of. I'm curious if you think that this might be add a little bit to it. But what Robert Eggers is saying is that she's kind of making a vapor rub. She's making a paste out of herbs and beef tallow and things in a bowl, and then dipping which is some sort of like a folk medicine kind of thing. She dips a rag in it and then wraps that rag around his chest, which is essentially like an attempt to sort of to stop the fever and the cold, right? Or like the pneumonia. And then she slits his temple, and they bleed him into a bowl. They're trying to bleed the madness and the fever out. And what he's saying is he liked the idea that the mother here is sort of practicing a form of like you would call it white magic, right? As opposed to the black magic that the witch is doing. You know, it's a
Sure.
contrast
Yeah, I
to
think I
grinding
I
of the
did have that
entrails.
sort of thought of a parallel
Yeah,
between, because it is blood magic in a sense. But I suppose like one of the interesting things about separating, black occult magic from good magic in the religious worldview is like what it's serving
yeah,
and what it's designed to do. So if it's serving one's own power, obviously that's a darker motivation than trying to heal someone of their ailments and stuff like that. Yeah, so but it is interesting that it's similar. That
yeah,
there's a bloodletting ritual thing that she's doing in a sense
yeah.
using or like it's kind of like good witchcraft in a sense.
Yeah, and like what he
Yeah.
says is like he wanted it to be a parallel sort of to like the grinding up of the baby's entrails at the beginning, right? The grinding up of the herbs and the tallow. But he's like, it's a little dark, so it doesn't translate. You can't really see what she's doing. And I wonder if like maybe an insert shot of her mixing it in whatever she's mixing it in, it might have served that purpose a little bit. Granted,
Mhm.
26 days, you only got so much time, but
Yeah, I don't think we're I mean maybe if you got a close but I like the choice to just hang on the shot that it cuz it that this little scene plays out almost entirely in one shot. And I think maybe cutting to a close-up shot of her
that might have been,
uh
yeah, that might have been a
it
little
might
bit.
have broken it a little bit. It might have, because I like it as is, and I don't feel like we're really missing that. I feel like there's enough there that you can make the connection if you want to. So here's the interesting thing. Like sometimes when we're talking like historical accuracy, and I like just seeing people do things, especially in period pieces, just seeing
Yeah,
how things were done in the past. And so I would have loved more detailed shots of that, but then there's like you have to weigh that up against how important is it compared to just telling the story itself and the emotion of the scene. You know what I mean? And I think just hanging on the shot, sort of wider shot, and it's kind of dimly lit by design. I think that works.
yeah,
You know what I mean? I think there's still enough that you can make that parallel in your head, right?
yeah. I like it's interesting too because like one of the things that I really do like about this movie is that there are more wide shots than
Hmm.
other modern. Like he makes more use of like the wide master shot than a lot of other modern directors, and I think that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I like him so much is because we actually get to like see the scenery
Yeah.
and the compositions as everything goes on. There were a
And also,
couple.
it's a slower pace to the editing. It's not as quickly cut as a lot of modern things are. And I think part of that helps accomplish the feeling of being in an old-fashioned world, right?
Yeah,
If it had sort of rapid David Fincher editing. I mean, and I say David Fincher because he's good at it.
yeah,
There's plenty of bad rapid fire editing, but it's just, I don't think it would have been appropriate for a movie like this. But something he does really well is he lets the pace of the movie actually be rather slow. And we'll hang on shots for longer. We'll hang on a two shot or a wide shot way longer than most people do. We just sort of live in that for longer. The shot of Caleb when he's getting his bandages wrapped around him and they do the bloodletting. That's all one unbroken take that kind of slowly pushes in, you know. And I like it. It's good. Topaz Dude mentions that he thinks he should have shot this on film. And it's like, yeah, so does he. It's just it wasn't in the budget.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it,
He,
it was not in the cards. They could not afford to make this movie on film with the money they had. He's talked about how he wished
yeah.
he could have shot it on film. Everything he's done since has been on film. But sometimes
It's
you just
actually
can't
kind
afford
of
it.
something kind of interesting too. He shot a lot of it on older zoom lenses that in order to make try to. They did lay a lot of dolly track, but a lot of it on older zoom lenses in a similar way to what you did with
Zoom lenses are slightly softer.
yeah,
They're not as crisp as prime lenses are. They're not as sharp, and I think that can help because often older movies shot on film aren't nearly as pristinely, crisply sharp
yeah,
as a lot of modern digital stuff is, and so that can help make it feel a little less clean and clinical.
yeah, sure.
And I think, considering they shot this on the Amira and not on film, I think they do a pretty good job.
Yeah. And funnily enough, too, the older zoom lenses caused a bit of a problem because they kept trying to do, tracking shots backward with it, and they kept screwing it up. because the older motors in the zoom lenses were like half dead, so
Yeah.
they would get stuck and there would be a problem. And so like, especially in the rainy sequences, they were like, guy, like I think it was in the sequence where Caleb's hanging off the fence. They did it on a lens where it kept messing up, and he was freezing his ass off. You know, he was wearing it, like, he's not cold, he's not naked,
He's
but
not completely naked, but
he's
yeah.
like, he's wearing like a
Close.
pair of biker shorts, you know, like cycling shorts, and he's like out in the rain hanging off the thing. And I think he said they had to shoot it like 10 times to get it right because the lens kept fucking up
Yeah,
on the
when you get
pullback.
old vintage lenses, like the housing of them isn't always super ideal for using like modern focus pulling and
Yeah.
motorized. For the short film that I did, we had like a special motor for the zoom that I actually got to control for a lot of the zoom shots. So that was fun for me. I was like, this is great. I could do this all day, but we have the rest of the movie to shoot. Anyway, like that, those were modern lenses with modern housing, and so they have gear wheels that are special, like well designed for that sort of system. But a lot of old vintage zoom lenses aren't necessarily built like that. So I can imagine like the that might get fucked up, and that might be a pain to use it sometimes.
Yep.
I actually don't know how much more shooting on film would add to the cost. A lot. It's a considerable amount. It's the reason they don't do it all the time.
Yeah.
It costs more. Like it adds enough, right? It adds, and it's also in delivery, and it's in processing and storage and all that sort of stuff. It adds up. Like
Especially shooting
obviously,
outdoors as well. Like it
yeah,
adds a
and so
whole other level.
there's so many things contributing to the budget of this movie, which is still very low, all things considered. But um, you know, it being a period piece is a big part of the budget. They built all these sets and everything, and all these costumes and everything. Like it would have cost too much to shoot it on film. That just seems demonstrably true, and that's true of a lot of things. Now, obviously, a lot of big budget things they probably could afford to shoot on film, but this is a pretty cheap movie, and he's said as much explicitly that he would have liked to shoot on film, but they just couldn't afford it.
Yeah. And yeah. Anyway, Caleb getting bled. If in the like, one of the things that I really like about that scene too is that CG, like they tried it apparently with blood packets to get that looking right, and it was a little bit too. It didn't work quite so well. So that blood is all CG. It looks pretty good. Like the CG that they do use is very.
Sorry, which blood are we talking?
From his temple.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't notice anything about it. I didn't.
Yeah.
It didn't.
It looks pretty good. The CG they use is very sparing, but it's solid. Like mostly it's to get the leash on the goat out of out of the frame.
That's funny. Yeah. That makes sense.
Remove modesty garments from the actors so that they're not actually naked.
Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. I didn't really think about like having to CGI the or having to using visual effects to remove the leash on the goat. Yeah, I did. When you mentioned earlier that there are some visual effects, but they did them quite tastefully. I was thinking about it in my head. I'm like, I can't think of what you're talking about, which I suppose is a compliment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and a lot of the stuff that they do, like, I mean, like the hand,
You said do.
I did say that.
The hand? Oh, the
hand. Like, because I think they went back and forth. He was saying on like whether or not to do it with makeup, and to like just make it the model's hand. Instead, they decided to just angle the shot in a particular way that they could hide an older woman under the cloak and get it to look pretty accurate. I just really I like that. I like that a lot. Adding those kinds of things. I think editing tricks. He does a lot of those in this one. He mentions when Thomason falls off the horse and it cuts to black, and she like falls off like just behind a tree, so you can't quite see the stunt person's face.
Ad or whatever.
Yeah, he goes. He's just like, I wish it looked less like a '50s movie or a '50s TV show, but it is what it is. We did what we could.
It looks fine.
Yeah.
I
think that's one of the things that I kind of disagree with him a little bit on. Like, there's also he says stuff about how like he wishes that he didn't use as many wide shots, And I'm like, I don't
No,
agree.
it works for this
I
because you
like
got
it.
to see the environment. I like it's interesting because I know he shot this movie in the aspect ratio he did, which is 1.66 to 1. You can't tell from looking at it because I've stretched it to fill the screen in this theater background we have. But if you were to see it on a television screen or a PC monitor, it has pillar boxing on the side, like those thin bars on the side, right? And one of the reasons he chose this aspect ratio over the many myriad options that you have available to you in the modern day is because he wanted the full height of the screen so you can feel like the tall trees and like the space above the characters, right? I think that was a really smart choice. I think this movie would look a lot worse if it was in scope, for example. I think a lot of those choices, but like that all really contributes to the feeling of the place, that you can see the height of the trees in these wide shots.
Yeah.
Like the wide shots are really good. I don't know why you would ever say you
What
wish you could do
the
that.
one that specifically I'm thinking of where he really said he wished he had got different coverage is when Caleb and Thomason at the end of that argument at the brook with the little girl with Mercy.
Mhm.
We cut to a wide where they're having a discussion, and he was like, "This is just bad storytelling. We really needed to be more like. I really wish I had got the two shot for this because it would have been more intimate. We needed the intimacy between the characters more."
Oh, okay, that's different.
And I'm like,
That's
that
different than
makes
saying,
sense. Then like, but he's
yeah,
like, there's certain parts where he's just like, yeah, I wish we hadn't used a wide here. This one
yeah,
probably could have been a little bit different, but what can you
yeah,
do?
yeah. Okay, that's different than I wish I shot less wide shots in this movie overall.
Yeah,
That makes sense. He's just like, I wish I got coverage of this moment closer because you really need to feel
yeah. Well,
the
there is that,
emotion
and
of
then
the
there is
character.
like there are moments where he's like, yeah, maybe the wide. Like, there's quite a few places where he's like, I don't know if the wide was the right choice here. But like, yeah, well,
Okay,
yeah.
that's fair.
So yeah,
That is fair. I know that feeling for sure. Like, why the fuck did I shoot this like this?
yeah, and
Um,
like I think that he really does defer a lot to his DP for those, and
mhm.
yeah, he comes up
Yeah,
with a lot of good stuff, man. That there's a
yeah. I
so,
think you should. I haven't listened to the commentary track. I'm definitely going to listen to that. But you should listen to the interview that him and Jaron Blaschke did with Roger Deakins and James Deakins.
I definitely will.
It's good. It's just called the Team Deacons podcast. You can find it with ease. It's good. It's really interesting to hear him talk because Roger Deakins is obviously a world class cinematographer in his own right. So it's interesting. They talk a bit more about the technical stuff. It's fun. I
Yeah,
like it.
yeah.
So let's see. Where are we now?
Uh, Caleb just got his head slit
Oh yeah.
open,
Yep.
and
Yes.
I think this is
And
mom is praying over him, and they have another argument. With the dad comes up, and he starts packing shit, and he's like, "I'm gonna, we're gonna go in the morning. We're gonna go back to the." We're gonna go back to the village. We're gonna get Caleb a doctor, and this is where
yeah.
she's like, I wish we were home. And he goes, we will be tomorrow. She goes, no, home in England. Yeah, and it's a
Yeah.
like that is a really great scene between two actors who are bringing a lot to the table. You know,
Oh yeah.
like the emotional tie that they have to their characters at that point is just phenomenal. They're really playing off each
Yeah.
other well.
I want to go through some of the dialogue in this scene because it's good. So she says, "Dust, remember John Kemp's son? That first winter he was tormented of Indian magic." And and
Those
he's like,
engines.
this isn't the same." And she says, "This is unnatural providence." And then like, "Does this not look like witchcraft?" And he's like, "What witch? Like, who does this thing? Who? Thy thoughts are as a child." So he's not happy with her jumping to things like witchcraft. Um He says, "We'll back to the plantation in the morn, find a good family for Thomason, take Caleb to the doctors. He will tell us this be some natural ill or no. Yet we cannot return as beggars. I will scour their field. I will scour the field. There must be some fruit yet untouched by this rot. I beseech thee, Catherine, what canst thou do for him presently?" "How might we all bear it to the village with no horse?" she asks. It's like, "Well, the little corn and the goats should fetch a fair price. We'll back with Caleb and sell them, return for a horse and the twins and Thomason. And she's like, you cannot leave them here, like Thomason and thee. And he's like, forget the crop. It's like, what does thou want? Like, what do you want me to do? Essentially,
Yeah.
he gets to the point. He's like, I'll sell the goats, I'll sell whatever crops we have left, and we'll get a horse, we'll get him to the doctor. It's like, I'm willing to give up quite a bit of what we still have in order to make this happen. And she's like, you can't leave us here. We're fucked. And he's like, what do you want, huh? What do you want? And she's like, I want to be home in England.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I want. I don't want to be here at all this. And she says, I also have a confession to make. I never meant to be a shrew to thee. I have become as Job's wife, I know it. But since my heart has turned to stone. I had dreamed once, 'twas when I was of Thomason's years, that I was with Christ upon the earth. I was so very near him, and in many tears for the assurance of the pardon of my sins. And I was so ravished with his love towards me, that I thought it far from exceeding the affection of the kindest husband. And since Samuel disappeared, I have such a sad weakness of faith I cannot shake it. I cannot see Christ's help as near. I pray and pray, but I cannot. I fear I cannot ever feel that same measure of love again. And then he doesn't know what to say at first, and he says, thou shalt have of it in heaven, and then he leaves. Oh my god, it's such a good
It's a
scene.
great scene,
Okay.
man.
It's so
It's
good.
so
Let's
good.
talk about it.
They almost
So-
cut it. They almost cut it too. He was saying like that. Like,
Really?
yeah. And the reason they went back and forth apparently about cutting this one because there's no. They were like, it's not really driving the plot forward. That's like that was the argument against it. Is like there's no plot happening. It's just
Character stuff.
character stuff.
But it's really important character stuff.
It's really important, and
Yes.
it is so solid. But like with these, I mean, really, Guy got real lucky with his actors in this
Oh,
movie
they're so good.
because like it's a long scene. First of all, like it is a
Mhm.
lot of dialogue, right? But
It's just really important for a couple reasons. For one, this is when the mom is finally confessing up to something.
yeah,
Like her own sort of weakness and what she's wanted. But I love this idea that like, when I was young, I had this, revelatory religious experience where I felt closer to God than I ever have. And I was just enraptured by it. And I was like, God has never felt more real to me and everything like that. But then ever since we moved here, ever since our child died, I feel like I'll never be able to feel that feeling again. And that's what I'm worried about. And she finally confesses that to him. And it lays all of that at William's feet. And William doesn't have anything else to say, but he'll have it in heaven.
yeah, and you can kind of feel you can kind of feel that like I think there's a part of him and his philosophy, his ideology that believes at that point, right, that she is one of the ones, like either that she's like one of the ones who is predestined, or he just doesn't like he has no answers in his theological background, and there's like some form of like either jealousy or like some form of jealousy or some form of just like helplessness, or
I
maybe
think
a
it's
mix of both.
helplessness.
Like
I think I would,
yeah,
yeah. Like he doesn't have anything to say to her there. Like this is the most honest she's ever been about how sad she is to be here.
yeah,
And like everything that like he's done to this family, and all he really has to say is like, well, you'll feel that way again in heaven, like because you're not getting it here, what I mean?
yeah.
He's kind of like helpless to help her feel that again at this point, especially with everything happening to them, but it's only gonna get worse. They're outside, and then the kids are singing the song again, or a different Black Phillip song. And
Yeah,
it's
this
funny
is where
because-
she's like the little girl's braiding Black Phillip's hair like on the side.
Yeah, like they're just kind of annoyed with the kids. They're like, "Shut up! Like I can't stand your stupid songs." But if they were really listening to the songs, they would be even more off put
Yeah.
by them. Black Phillip is a merry, merry king. He rules the land with mirth. Black Phillip has a mighty, mighty sting. He'll knock thee to the earth. Sing ba ba, King Philip the Black. Sing ba 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 ba. Sing ba ba, King Philip the Black. Hell knock thee on thy back. And that's the line that like gets them to be like, All right, shut the fuck up now, please.
Isn't there a scream that happens? Like there's a scream when she says that, and then like everybody kind of like freaks out and
Yeah.
runs into the house. And this
Yeah,
is
it's
where we get
Caleb.
this amazing 17-page monolith of a scene.
Yeah,
But
this scene is probably the it's the big one.
yeah.
There's so much happening here. It's great. We're gonna go through it slowly. So they hear a scream. They go up to Caleb, and Caleb is screaming. He's screaming, "Get the broad axe and cut off her head. Get the narrow axe and cut off her head. Get the broad axe and cut off her head. She's upon me. She kneels. My bowels, my stomach. She pinches, scratches. Sin, sin, sin." And he's like contorting himself and like arching off of the bed and everything. And they're like, "Thomason, get these kids out of here." And then they're like, "Who does this to thee? Who does this?" And then like his mouth is sealed up and like something's in his mouth. They're not sure what it is. They pull it out and there's a small apple lodged
He
in his
like
mouth.
pukes up an apple.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
is a great detail.
Yeah.
So good. And then they're like, "He is witched." And then the kids are like, "It's her, it's Thomason, she did it." And they're like, "What?" Like, and then Thomason's like, "God damn you stupid kids, like don't say that. Like, what are you doing?" And it's like, she told me she stole Sam." And she's like, "Silence." Like, she gave him to the devil in the wood. And she's like, "They're lying." And then she said, "She turned Flora's milk to blood. She had bade us keep secret from you." And she's like, "I was just."
That's right. Because like right before this all happens, they're in the barn, and Thomason is like, she kind of tries to be more of like a kindly older sister to the girl because she's talking to Philip and saying shit about her.
Yeah.
And she says something like, "No, I would never hurt you." You know, that she's like, "That's not what you said before." Like you little fucking brat. And then she goes to
Yeah.
milk the goat, and the goat's milk turns to blood, and she freaks out,
Yeah.
and they all look at it, and they're like, "Oh,
Right,
so, yeah,
right.
So
Got
yeah,
that bit. Yes. And so now they're turning on her, and the choice to play a witch just to get back at her sister is not paying off for her. And they're like she made a bargain with Satan. She signed his book. And then they're like, "Don't let her near me. She'll place a curse on me." And Thomason's naturally freaking out because this does not look good for her at all. She's like, "They conspire against me. Like, Thomason is a witch." And the dad's like, "I won't hear it. I'll have proof of it or heaven help thee." And he says, "On thy knees" to Thomason. And this is like the chaos of this scene is incredible. It's just very tense. And he says, "Look me in thy eye, daughter. Does thou love the word of God?" And she says, "Yes." "Love you the Bible? Love you prayer?" And she's like, "Yes, yes." And he says, "We are children of sin all, yet I tell thee, I have raised up no witch in this house. Let us pray, then we need fear nothing." And so then they all hold hands to start to pray around Caleb. And they start to pray, and then the kids are like, over. "I forgot my prayers." They're
remember me prayer.
I can't remember my prayer. And they're like, like mumbling. They're trying to pray, and they're just like their bodies are like refusing to do it, which is a really interesting detail. Because if you believe, as is quite natural to believe, that they're kind of under the influence of Satan at this point, that like Satan won't let them say it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you like, that's one of the things that happened in the Salem witch trials a lot is that they would say like, "Oh, I can't remember." Like, in order to prove they were witched, they would start like trying to say the Our Father or something like that, and they wouldn't be able to do it. You know?
Yeah.
Like
I love that detail.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's great.
They try saying the Our Father and it doesn't work, and then they start like contorting on the ground. Essentially, no, it's not right away, but eventually, what's his name? Caleb starts speaking again. I think he says a toad, a cat, a crow, a raven, a great black dog, a wolf. He's just saying things. He's like, "She desires of my blood. She desires of my blood. She sends them upon me. She desires of my blood. They feed upon her teats. She desires of my blood. Her nether parts." He's just, he's going off.
Yeah.
And they're freaking out. And they're like, "Think on Christ, Caleb." Like, "She sends her devils. I am thine enemy. She desires of my blood, wallowing in the blood and filth of my sins. The Lord is my shepherd. I am thine enemy. I shall not want. He maketh me to rest in green pasture, and leadeth me by the still waters. He restoreth my soul, and leadeth me in the paths of righteousness, for his name's sake. I am thine enemy. Yea, though I should walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And so he goes into that's Proverbs, right?
Yeah,
Or
it's
Psalms. I
yeah.
can't remember which. It's one of those two. That's obviously a very famous passage. Passage. I just can't remember what book it's from. Chat will know. And then he sort of like stops speaking for a bit, and they're like, Caleb, Caleb, and he says, "Cast the light of thy countenance." His expression changes here. He was feeling very obviously tormented by this witch upon him and all the beasts of the earth that she was sending against him and everything. And then a flip happens, and all of a sudden he has this like enraptured look on his face, and he says, "Cast the light of thy countenance upon me, spread over me the lap of thy love, wash me in the ever flowing fountains of thy blood. Holy thine I am, my sweet Lord Jesus, my Lord, my love. Kiss me with the kisses of thy mouth. How lovely art thou, thy embrace. My Lord, my Lord, my Lord, my love, my soul's salvation, take me to thy lap." And then I don't know how else to say it. He has an orgasm and then he dies.
Yeah. A religious or
Yes, he has
a come to Jesus moment, you could call it.
God damn it. But yeah, this is a fascinating and horrifying scene for a number of reasons, and it's not over yet. But yes, Psalm 23, as people are saying in chat. So he's being tormented by the witch, and then he says his prayer. He says the lines from Psalm, and then he and then he has this moment where he has this blissful sort of oh god, what's the word? Like ecstatic experience
Yeah.
of being in the presence of God. And he's looking up, he's not looking at anyone in the room. He's just looking past them up towards the heavens, and he's reaching out towards Jesus, and it's an interest like remarkably sexual thing. And I think it's really interesting that he mentions that like kiss me with the kisses of thy mouth and all that sort of stuff right after that like experience he had with the witch
Yeah.
before. And then god, the performance the kid gives in this
Yeah.
scene is just incredible. It's creepy, and like you're not quite sure what to make of it, like whether that was a real, like, you know what I mean, in the logic of the story, was that an actual, like, did he kind of have that vision of God
Yeah.
and now he's in heaven, or was that some sort of dark
Well,
twisted
and like
thing?
his eyes at
Like,
the end of the whole
yeah,
thing, like right before he goes, his eyes open wide in this like an expression that could be read either as like a like an awe, I guess awesome in the older
yeah.
sense of the word, right? Like
Mhm.
is it that kind of experience, or is that fear that he's like made a mistake and like, oh shit, wait a minute, and then like at the end it's like right, because it happens right before he dies, and
Yes.
you just don't know,
Yeah.
and that's such a
I
such a
think
nice touch.
the unknown is part of what makes it so creepy and horrifying. You know, like was
Yeah.
like I don't know what to make of that, but it was a weird blend of sort of like an out of body near death experience wrapped up with this sort of weirdly sexual ecstatic sort of religious experience, and the kid just nails it.
Yeah,
um
absolutely. I mean, all of them do. Like the fact that he managed to get those twins to do to hit those performance cues
yeah,
so
because
well
like
too.
in the midst of that, the kids like drop down to the ground and start writhing around on the ground like Caleb's writhing on the ground,
Yeah,
but
and
in a much
they're
more
saying like
like
Thomas and Thomas. Yeah,
sort of in a much more mocking, sort of derisive sort of way.
yeah,
And then they like faint and then they won't say anything. So then, okay, so Caleb is dead. The mom is yelling out his name or calling his name, and he's not responding. Like, wake up, like shaking his head. And he's doing a very good job of pretending to be dead,
yeah,
like remarkably good. And then, and they're like, Jonas, Mercy, get up, get up. And then they're not responding. They're just laying on the ground too. And then Thomason tries to like lean towards Caleb, and the mom screams, "Get away from him!" Like, get the hell away from him. So it's like, uh-oh, that's not good.
Yeah.
I think she thinks maybe Thomason is a witch.
Yeah,
And
maybe
that's
she's
not
been
great.
convinced.
Yeah, that's not good. The mom's clearly going through it. So Thomason runs outside, and the dad runs out after her. Thomason kind of collapses on the ground outside by a tree. She's crying, and the dad comes up. This is a really interesting scene for the dad. The dad comes up, tries to comfort her, but by like essentially immediately changing the subject, like, "Hey, let's think about other things." And it's like, dude, like, not now. Like, you can't just divert the conversation. Like, they all just experienced the craziest shit, most horrific thing they've ever seen in their lives. And he's like, this tree will be lovely come spring. Do you remember when we came hither? Such a pretty tree. Next year I'd have sown a wheat field, started at this tree and ended thither. We'd have a proper farm then. And it's like, dude, not now. Like, you, what do you like? Did you think this was gonna work? And Thomason like is kind of almost like repulsed by this. Like, it has the opposite effect. Like, what are you doing right now?
Does not
Like, this
comfort
isn't.
at all.
No, not even the slightest. But like, that's kind of his MO, is that he just kind of diverts away
It's
in a
always about him. Yeah.
sense, or it's always trying to don't worry about it. Don't worry about this horrible thing. Just think of thy blessings, and think of the good. And it's like, that's not what we need right now, man. He's talking about how great the farm's going to be, and then he says, and then he kind of pivots and he says, "You must tell me, Thomason. Tomorrow I cannot keep secret of this. A council will be called, and thy life is like." And so basically, he's like, "If you're a witch, you got to tell me."
Yeah.
And
You gotta let me know. Come on.
like, you don't believe me? And he says, "I saw the serpent in my son. You stopped their prayer." And it's like, they're lying, dude.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, "I saw it." And it's like, "Caleb disappeared with thee," he says. And she's like, "I
Sam.
love Caleb." Huh?
Sam and Caleb disappear. Like doesn't he say Sam
Yeah.
too at some point? Yeah,
I don't think so. I think he just says Caleb disappeared with thee. He's talking about when he goes missing originally. Um, and he's like, "Well, then who found him? Pale as death, naked as sin, and witched." Like, "Thomason, listen to me. The bargain thou hast made is of no effect." And so he's just like, "Okay, listen. I know you signed a deal with the devil. You don't gotta honor that. It's the devil, all right?"
Yeah. You
Love,
don't look.
I love that
You don't gotta. You don't
strategy.
gotta be honored. You don't have to. Go by your word. He doesn't.
Yeah. I just love that. He's immediately like, "Listen, I know you signed a deal with the devil. Like, I understand. You don't have to honor that bargain." And she's like, "I fucking didn't." Like, what are you doing?
And then she she sort of asserts herself, as this is going on, right? And she starts
Oh, yeah.
calling him out. She's just like, you can't grow corn, you can't hunt, you have you can do nothing but chop wood, right? It's
Mhm.
maybe a little unfair. He built the farm. Him
Oh,
and
yeah,
Caleb.
yes. Specifically, um, he's like,
Thomas and thou art a
I
sussy.
beg you
Okay.
to speak the truth. I beg you to speak truth." And she's like, "Oh, you want me to speak the truth, do you?" He's like, "You and mother plan to rid the farm of me. I heard you speak of it. Is that truth? You took of mother's cup and let her rail at me. You confessed not till it was too late. Is that truth?" And
Yeah.
he's like, trying to get her to stop. He's like, "I will not." And she's like, "I am your father." And it's like, "You're a hypocrite. Like, you took Caleb to the wood and let me take the blame of that too. Is that truth?
Yeah.
You let mother be as thy master. You cannot bring the crops to yield. You cannot hunt. Is that truth enough? Thou canst do nothing save cut wood." I think he calls her a bitch.
Yeah, he does. He says,
Yeah.
"Bitch." Really
And
got her.
yeah. And he says, "And you will not hear me, must," and then he says, "Must I hear the devil wag his tongue in thy mouth?" Which is a great line.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great lines, but that one is especially. And and then she's like, "Go ask the twins. They spend all day long talking to that horned beast. They know well his voice." So then she's like, "Oh yeah, well, if you won't believe me, maybe it's those goddamn kids. They're always like babbling about Black Phillip and how he speaks to them, whispers. He's Lucifer, and you know it." It's like, it's not me, it's them. And he says, "Slander thy brethren no more." And so then he's like, "Okay, fine. Well, I don't know what's going on, but we're gonna have to ride out in the morning, and I'm not dealing with any of this bullshit tonight, so I'm locking you both up in the barn.
Oh no,
So,
he runs in first. He drags her into the house, right? And like the mom
oh
is
yeah, I
prepping
skipped
Caleb on
over
the
a bit.
table. I don't want to
Yeah,
skip this scene because this is the scene where he screams at like she starts talking and he just screams like "Silence, creature!"
yeah.
A great line.
Go ahead, keep going.
Um, but he comes in, he's just like, "All right, fine. You think it's the twins, is it? All right, let's go." And then he goes in there and he's just like basically playing it up, kind of. He's like bought into the idea. The whole like, all right, fine. Then we're gonna solve this problem now. He storms in, and his wife is putting Caleb, getting him ready for burial. And
Mhm.
he's just like, all right, well, you know what? Get up, you two, because the twins are still pretending to be passed out on the bed. You know, like, get up,
Yep.
you two, get up and tell me what you've been up to. You've been making pacts with that goat, and all that. And the mom is yelling at him back. She's just like she's Caleb. He's it was Satan, I know it. And he's like, no, he's in heaven. He saw Jesus. And she's like, no, no, no. The devil speaks in Scripture too. We know that to be a fact. And then he's Thomason comes in there and she's yelling back. He drops the silence creature on her, and then he
Mhm.
says to grab the little like the thing from the corn, and he's gonna split open Jonas's skull because like if it's true, right? He's like, I'll dash his
It,
brains out myself, and then he picks the kid up by the scruff of the neck.
hold on, it's
That's
great, but
great.
it's even better than that because he says like, and I will smite Jonas as Abraham would have done his seed.
Yes, yeah, 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 yeah. That's a
Hmm.
great line too. Fucking
Yep.
great. Yeah, yeah, and then he grabs him by the scruff of his neck and picks him up and yells at him in his face. The kid screams. Like the
Yeah.
chaos that is erupting in this
Oh yeah.
scene is amazing. And then he decides like, fuck it, we're leaving in the morning. I'm not dealing with this bullshit. I'm gonna lock you all in the barn.
I'll break thee out upon the dawn, and we'll set back to the plantation. Think on thy sins.
Another great
And
line from that scene too, though, is like she goes like, "No, no, no, don't trap," like because Thomason's begging him not to trap her in there with them, right? And he goes, "If that
mhm,
goat is the devil, I've danced with him myself," which I do. I love that line,
yeah.
because he did. He grabbed him and put him in the pen. So he's got this
Yep.
swagger and confidence back finally, about like getting shit done.
Yeah, he's taking charge, that's for sure. I love him like, "Oh, you're gonna keep pretending to be dead, huh? Then I'll fucking kill you." And the
Yeah,
kid's like, "Ah!" Like, "All right, I'll stop pretending to be dead now. Please don't kill me." Like, Jesus Christ. And so yeah, then they get locked up in the barn. It's Thomason, the goats, Mercy and Jonas all in this barn that's been boarded up. And meanwhile, they go bury Caleb. And there's a great moment, a great wide shot that shows up in the trailer that's on loop, of that moment. But then she crawls into the grave and lays on top of him. And then we just cut to his reaction shot where he just gives her this look. And that's that scene. Great. No dialogue needed for that. Says
yeah.
everything you could need to say. Great. Obviously, he doesn't bury her, but she clearly wants to. And then
The scene where they're in the I want you to read the dialogue from when Thomason and Jonas and Mercy are in the barn together, because things have sort of calmed down. They're sitting on either end, they don't have anything to do. But she asks the kids, "Are
doth
you
he really
witches?"
speak to thee?
Oh, she asks, "Are you witches?" And I can't
Oh,
remember
right,
what
right,
she
right, 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 right.
says. What does Mercy
Okay,
say to that?
yes, he says, "Are you witches?" And Mercy says, "Does Father think I am?" She says, "Are you?" She says, "No." No,
Oh yeah,
they
does
say,
Father think I
but she
am? And
doesn't answer,
yeah, she does. So she doesn't
basically.
answer. Yeah, yeah, that's what I was curious about. Yeah, I couldn't remember.
And then he says, "Doth he really speak to thee?" And then they don't respond. And we just get that close up shot of Black Phillip panting, like,
Yeah.
and then we get a very, very interesting scene for the dad where he's alone outside by the woodpile, essentially, in the moonlight, and he's talking directly to God. And this is where he kind of comes closest he ever gets to admitting um, his own faults and weaknesses here. He says, "It is my fault, I confess it. Oh my God, I am false. I am infected with the filth of pride. I know it. I am. Dispose of me as thou wilt, yet redeem my children. They cannot tame their natural evils. I lie before thee a coward and thine enemy, and I lick the dust of thy earth. I beg thee, save my children. I beg thee, my Christ, I have not damned my family, my lambs, my angels.
I fucking love that scene. It's
Yeah.
so like it's so interesting too that he brought that up as like a uh, like
So the defrosted robot says, "Father, I have goofed."
I have goofed.
Yeah, he goofed pretty hard in this one.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
may have gone a little too far in a few places. Yes, exactly. That's exactly right.
I lick the dust of thine earth. My God, my Jesus, please help Jar Jar work.
We can get him working. And it's an interesting scene because it's like, oh, he finally realizes it and he
Yeah.
finally admits it. Like you can tell he knows it deep down, but he's not been willing to admit it to himself or to anyone. And then Thomason like sees him say all this, but we're at a point where it's too late.
Yeah.
It's too late. We're already on the path. Like things have gone horribly wrong and they're not getting any better. Part of me when I was watching it this time around, I'm like, oh, could things get nicer now? He admitted it. Like, please,
Yeah.
no, because it gets so much worse, you know. Um, yes, but alas, it doesn't. Then we get a vision, a nightmare or a dream that the mother is having, where she wakes up in the middle of the night and finds Caleb holding Samuel.
And the silver cup. The silver cup's on the
And
shelf
oh yeah,
behind her, yeah.
I forgot the silver cup. It's just on the shelf.
Yeah, she goes downstairs with the candle and like the silver cup is behind her and she looks at it and then she turns around and sees Caleb sitting
Right.
with Samuel.
Right. Right. And so this is obviously not really happening, but it's presented very matter of factly, and I appreciate that. It's a really strong visual choice to not go dreamy with this. Just present it like they're really there in the room.
Yeah.
And Caleb's like, "Mother, we have longed to see you so." And then she's like, "I must wake father. He'll be so glad." And they go, "No, let him sleep. We would see you oft, mother. Would that please you?" And she's like, "Aye." And then he says, "I have brought a book for you, mother."
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. I really like the idea that essentially the devils or the witches are like preying upon her grief
Yeah.
to get her to sign away her soul, essentially.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? That like the way that they get Thomason is desire, like and
Yeah.
that teenage desire to like return to
See the world and to return to the luxury
to
she got to
luxury.
experience. Yeah.
And the way that they get the mother is this like and I don't want to call it this necessarily, but I'm going to say the word because I can't think of a better one, is like the sort of like self-pitying. I like 'cause from before she has more of a self-pitying pessimistic streak to her, and so they kind of get her through the grief in that instance because we know that that's
Yeah.
like her weakest point, right? Is
Yeah.
her own personal grief.
Yeah.
That I like that a lot.
They don't corrupt the dad. He's kind of like I mean, he doesn't get corrupted by Satan, but this is kind of all his fault instead.
Yeah.
The kids, they just, the devil's whispering things in their ear, essentially, and kind of like playing, I guess you could say, on their like animosities, rivalries they have between the other siblings. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's all. That's all there really is to it there. And with Caleb, what would you say about Caleb in terms of?
I was Lust, right? They get him with his like
Yeah,
budding.
that's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other question, I guess, is like, do they ultimately get Caleb?
And I don't. I am not inclined to think so. Actually, I'm more
I think
inclined
so too.
to think that the mother's grief and like the mother's attitude towards pessimism causes her to look at what she should recognize as a similar experience to the one that she says she had, right? It causes her to look at that as like
It could be a
false.
trick.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
trick. I think
I'm not quite
that's
sure what the movie wants me to think about that, but I'm inclined to believe that Caleb kind of he dies, but he manages to essentially escape being totally corrupted
Yeah.
here. Like that experience he has is like true in a sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That like
well,
that like I don't, but it could go either way, so
the
it's kind of hard to
symbolism
say.
of his body physically rejecting the apple, right? Like
Yeah.
being the original sin. Like
Hmm.
it's a horrifying way of showing it, but I feel like it's the like I like the idea that it's, he has
Surprisingly positive.
yeah, it's a
Yes.
horrifying yet positive image. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a great way of putting it.
That he kind of manages to escape and potentially goes on to heaven or whatever.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, but definitely lust is what does it for him. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. 100%. All right, where were we? So,
We were at the mom coming down to see Caleb and Samuel, and then she
yes.
goes to breastfeed the baby, and it turns out there's a raven eating her titty.
Yeah,
And it's
that's
fucking
that's
horrifying, dude.
that's hard to
That's a
watch. That's a
difficult
tough
one.
one. That one
He was
causes.
saying in the commentary too, he's just like she has a fake breast on, obviously, and the raven was
Yeah,
so well trained,
yeah,
but everybody behind the camera is like holding their breath, like holding each other, watching because they're so worried.
yeah,
Because if anything goes wrong, there is like it's because it's a fucking animal, right? You don't know what it's gonna
yeah,
do when it might
yeah,
bite just a little too hard.
yeah.
But yeah,
That one's hard to watch. That one like causes me physical pain a little bit. I'm just
yeah,
like, oh, I do not like that. Meanwhile, while that's happening, we're kind of cutting back and forth with uh the witch visiting the the barn at night. Like there's the it's kind of unclear exactly, but there's the sense that something lands on the roof, and
yeah.
then they're kind of like the camera is like tracking it across the ceiling, and then when we land in the dark corner, there's the witch there, and she's like
Suckling at the
pulling it.
goat teats, yeah.
Yeah, and then like we're kind of slowly zooming in on her, and then she turns around, and it's like ha ha, like, she just kind of
Yeah.
cackles like an old witch. And then we cut back to the crow pecking at the mom's teat. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. We wake up in the morning, the dad goes outside.
God, it's
And
so funny.
holy shit, what a bloodbath.
What a fucking scene to see. Yeah. I love his commentary track on this part because he goes, "Well, Ralph, we talked about getting him super drunk the night before we shot this scene so that he would be hungover. He just
Yeah.
ended up doing it all with his acting though." I'm like, "Yeah, good."
You know, you can just let people act. It
You can't,
doesn't they
yeah.
don't need to literally be
It's
hungover.
like that thing with Dustin Hoffman with Marathon Man or whatever. Like when he ran a mile before they started shooting, so that he would be sweaty and out of breath. And the guy comes over and goes, "Kid, have you heard of this thing called acting?"
It's funny.
Yeah,
Hey man, whatever gets you there, I guess. Yeah, so he comes outside and the whole like side of the barn has been like blown out essentially. There's a dead goat on the ground. We don't get it clearly shown in close-ups, but it looks like Jonas and Mercy are dead.
yeah,
Uh, Dead or gone, it's not entirely clear. I think there's at least one body we see, right?
yeah. You at least see the feet like hanging out
Yeah.
somewhere in the back
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So they've been killed. Thomason is there and she kind of wakes up. And before there could be any sort of like "I didn't kill everybody" moment for
he
Thomason,
looks like up, right? The dad
yeah,
looks up, like basically just being like, "Oh, like, are you fucking kidding me?" Like essentially,
yeah,
and then
and then
he gets
he
hit
gets
by
gored by
Gourd
Black
right in
Phillip.
the fucking gut.
This is one of the only other moments where I'm annoyed with the movie for cheating with sound. That Black Phillip just sneaks up on him and goes, "Ah, gotcha! Didn't hear that coming."
Yeah,
Like
I
we're
think
just
it would have worked just fine even if they hadn't if they hadn't cheated
yeah,
with the sound, like had to build up or whatever, would have been
yeah,
fine. Still would
yeah,
have
because you
worked.
still don't expect the goat to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
you know
it's
what I mean?
already like he's already
Distracted.
distracted and like
Yes,
in his own head,
overwhelmed.
like his situational awareness is not at peak.
No. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, we didn't need to cheat with sound there. But anyway, he gets gored in the stomach by Black Phillip. who then backs up and like stands on his back legs like, haha, fuck you. Like I love this little like dance thing they get the goat to do. It's a great
Yeah.
little detail. And then here comes, I don't know what you make of this line, but he's like having this face off with Black Phillip, who eventually rams into him, knocks him into the pile of firewood. The firewood all comes crashing down onto him, and then he's presumed dead, right?
Yeah.
Um, he says one thing in here. I actually learned that it's not in the original script, which you can find online, but it is in the movie. He says, "Corruption, thou art my father."
Hmm.
What do you make of this line?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know.
I
That sounds like a I've lost faith kind of thing.
Yes, and I don't like that choice.
Yeah, I'm not big on it. That
It just doesn't seem to fit him, as has been established. I don't quite believe him completely losing faith like that as a result of all. I mean,
that's tough though, because like he comes out
it's
and sees his children.
it's understandable for a person, but
Yeah,
I feel like it doesn't make sense for him to me.
yeah. I'm not.
And part of it is like atheism is like so beyond like something he would be able to like fathom from the like the time and place and worldview that he came up in, right? So it's not atheism or the lack of a belief in there being a god that he comes to here. It's almost like evil is real but good isn't. Like
You
when he said
could,
like
I mean,
corruption.
maybe you could say that, but he has sort of had that belief the whole time, right? That like
Yeah.
maybe I think the best way you could read that is that he's just now like convinced essentially because he does believe in a predestination version of Christianity and of grace, right? So
Yeah.
this to him proves he's not one of the pious, you know? He's not one of the chosen. He is, this is like confirmation that he is not going to receive that. He's not going to heaven. In that
Yeah,
sense.
it's a weird line. Corruption, thou art my father. I I don't know exactly what to take that as, but I don't love it. Something about it feels wrong to me, and it's hard to articulate
Yeah,
why.
it's a strange choice. I'm not sure. I'm doing my best to try to sort of like
Yeah,
come up
no, I
with
can.
something. And I don't hate that explanation. Um but I'm not sure I'm not sure I like the turn, because especially since we are going to get a turn with the mother, right? Like
Yeah,
we've got a turn with the mother. We've got to. I don't like that the only one who makes it out like completely in I guess technically you don't even know this for sure, right? I don't like the only one that making it out completely, on in
that
a
he isn't corrupted the way the others
that
are.
Caleb's the only one who gets out,
Yeah,
right? I'm not thrilled with
like
that. I guess Sam probably, but they just, given how they are. Yeah.
yeah, something about that line just stands out to me as like either out of character or like I'm just really not sure what it's supposed to mean. It seems to imply something that I disagree with, but it's hard to say for sure.
I mean, my best guess is that it's
Yeah,
like he prostrated himself in like in the ritual, licking of the earth. Um, he did his best to beg God for what, for to save his family, and then he comes out the next morning and they're dead basically, except for Thomason, who he was kind of suspicious of essentially. And
yeah.
he's just like, well, guess this proves. I guess. Oh, guess that's it.
I am a son of
I
corruption
am
or
a son of
something.
corruption. Yeah. Well,
I
shit.
guess
I'm not one of the chosen. And then
maybe,
he gets rammed. That's
maybe.
the best I can come up with. I don't mind. I
Anyway,
don't hate
he
it.
gets bonked. He gets bonked by Black Phillip. Black Phillip's like, nah, fuck this guy. You're done. And then he gets the pile of firewood falls on him. The imagery there, not lost on me.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Um, So then the mom comes out. Then Thomason sort of like comes over towards the dad, and then this is the other big moment where the movie cheats with sound, where the mom's just like ah, and she's just right there all of a sudden, and she like grabs
Yeah,
her,
grabs her
and it's like,
hair.
you didn't see or hear her come out of the building. She snuck up on you, really? Like it's a little cheap, and we're cheating with sound again. We've done that like maybe 3 times in the movie, and I don't like it any of the times they do it. But yeah, it's kind of a jump scare or something like it. It's a sudden surprise that isn't quite earned. You know, we haven't staged things properly to earn her sneaking up on you like this. But here we are.
Yeah,
Um,
again, it's another one that didn't even really need to happen, right?
didn't
Because like
need it. No, it
you
didn't
can
need to
just
be
say
a
like, yeah, she's
surprise.
fucking shocked. She just
I
watched her
think I
dad
would.
get killed
Yeah,
and her
I
all
think
of her siblings.
I think we don't even need the surprise. She could have just walked out, and then we see the look of this scene dawning on her face.
Yeah,
Like that's all we need. We don't need a surprise. Because like if she just walked out and like looked at all this, and when we see Thomason having that like, oh shit, look at the way this all looks, holy shit, like
yeah,
that works. I would say better probably, but
yeah.
it's a small thing. It's a small change. Um, she's what hast thou done? Where are they? Like I did nothing. She says she came from the sky. That's her talking about the witch that killed Mercy and Jonas. Um, and of course, the mom is not really listening at this point. She calls her a devil. She says, it's you, it's you. The devil is in thee and hath had thee. You are smeared of his sin. You reek of evil. You have made a covenant with death. And Thomason's begging for her life. But it's falling on deaf ears. You bewitched thy brother, proud slut. Did you not think I saw thy sluttish looks to him, bewitching his eye as any whore? Like, oh God. Jesus Christ. This poor girl. And thy father next. And she's saying, no, no, no. She's begging for her life. You killed thy father, witch. And she's like, I love you. She's like begging her. She's like, please, please. And then she kind of tackles her to the ground. And to defend herself, Thomason grabs some sort of
She
knife
grabs the
thing.
thing that they're using to cut the corn.
Cut the corn, yeah.
Yeah,
And then she kind of hits her mom with it, creates a sort of bloody gash on her face, but hasn't like killed her or anything. And the mom like starts like the blood starts pouring out of her face, and the mom is kind of shocked. And then the mom grabs Thomason by the throat and starts to strangle her. And
yeah, and then
and Thompson's begging for her life, and then eventually it gets to the point where she doesn't have a choice, and then she
she gets
uses the
a
knife,
nice couple of slasher movie shunk shunk like as she
yeah,
cuts her mom.
hacks at her, yeah, mom until she finally collapses onto her, and then she very slowly and like, I mean, agonizingly slowly pushes her off of her and gets up, and we all just like we hang in this wide shot, this sort of unbroken wide shot for a long time. We just really let that moment sit. Really,
Yeah,
really, really strong choice because it's horrifying. It's
it
horrible. Like
absolutely
this
is.
boy,
Yeah. Also, I
you
will be
know.
right back.
Oh, there he goes. Yeah. So, and now everyone's dead but her. Womp womp. That did not go well for anybody. Obviously, I mean, I think what hit me hardest about this movie, watching it again, is just like a family all going crazy and murdering each other is, I don't know, it hits pretty hard. It's pretty emotionally gut wrenching, especially for Thomason's character at this point in the movie, who hasn't actually done anything wrong. And of course the mom thinks she killed everyone and ruined the whole family, and then she's trying to kill her, so she has to kill her in self-defense. That's pretty brutal, pretty horrifying. And then now everyone's dead but her. And I kind of like how we slow down at this point. Like we just hang on these really long takes.
Oh,
You
interesting.
know?
Okay, so I wanted to just check because there's the line "Corruption, thou art my father" is from Job. The credit here goes to Dunny in the chat. It's from Job, 17:14, and it says, "I have said to corruption, thou art my father; to the worm, thou art my mother and my sister." That's the reference. So it's a Job reference.
Okay.
And the chapter is titled in the King James version, "Job, Where is My Hope?" So
So
that
is that Job? Is that Job saying it?
yes,
Interesting. I'm sorry, I'm reading the lines before and after it.
yeah. I
Get
mean,
some
I can go
context.
from like my breath is corrupt, my days are extinct, the graves are ready for me. Are there not mockers with me, and doth not mine eyes continue in their provocation? Lay down now, put me in a surety with thee. Who is he that will strike hands with me? For thou hast hid their heart from my understanding, therefore shalt thou not exile them. A lot of like my days are past, my purposes are broken off, even the thoughts of my heart. They change the night into day, the light is short because of darkness. If I wait, the grave is mine house. I have made my bed in the darkness. I have said
All right,
corruption. Yeah,
I'm going to interrupt you. So it seems I haven't read Job in a long time. I'm assuming this is kind of Job at his weakest point,
I
kind of
would
deal.
assume so. Yeah, that's what it looks. I'm not sure where in the story we are. Um, but yeah, I think this seems to be his all is lost moment.
That's fair.
Yeah,
That's fair. That makes a bit more sense. I think out of context in the movie, it feels a bit like he's made a turn that I don't know if we've done enough to support. Um, I think out of context, it seems to imply some things that maybe with that extra context that they weren't going for. I don't know. There's something about like corruption. Thou art my father. It's almost like I don't know because he's facing and talking to Black Phillip, who is the devil.
yeah,
So it kind of implies some other things to me. I'm not sure about that one. I have to think about it more. But that's interesting. That's an interesting because they've made reference to Job a couple times in the story.
yeah. Well, I think this is sort of a this is sort of like a puritanical version of a Job story, right? Like, calling and trying to reconcile the suffering with the predestination doctrine, you know,
Yeah,
that kind of thing, which is
interesting.
interesting. Um,
Anywho, um, now everyone is dead but Thomason, and she gets up. It's kind of there's a great wide shot of her like covered in blood, standing in front of the homestead where there's just bodies and blood scattered everywhere. There's a really interesting moment where she walks back into the house and she takes off her bloody clothes. She sits at the table and just lays her head down and presumably sleeps there for the
yeah,
whole rest of the day. That's a great choice. That like
yeah,
she's so overwhelmed and exhausted by this that she just doesn't know what to do at all. Because like I think they've mentioned it a few times, she's a day's ride from town and
yeah,
she doesn't have a horse. So it's like, what is she gonna do? She just goes and she takes a nap because like she doesn't know what else to do. That's a great detail. She wakes up and this is where like it's unclear exactly whether this is score or diegetic sound, but there's like sort of like a jingling bell sound, like
yeah.
a sort of twinkling that
Like a
I
wind
hasn't
chime.
really, hasn't really appeared in the score much before this moment, so it's unclear. But something rouses her from her sleep and she walks back to I think it's the barn, right? Yeah. She goes back to the
Well, yeah,
barn.
she walks out to the barn and Black Phillip is standing there, and then he turns inside and she follows him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She goes into the barn and she says, Black Phillip, I conjure thee to speak to me. Speak as thou dost speak to Jonas in mercy. Dost thou understand my English tongue? Answer me. Black Phillip doesn't say anything. Right as she's about to turn around, he says, in a very, very cool voice, I would add. Like,
yeah,
this, I love whoever they got to give this performance says, what dost thou want? She says, what canst thou give? And he says, wouldst thou like the taste of butter, a pretty dress? Wouldst thou like to live deliciously? He says, yes.
says
Wouldst
I've
thou
got a
like to
natty bow and a bag of crab chips right here.
wouldst thou like to see the world? says, what will you from me? He says, dost thou see a book before thee? And then we cut to the ground and there's a book on the floor, and we see like boots with like spurs on them or something.
Yeah.
Uh,
God, it was so funny listening to him talk about this because he's like, yeah, we got this dude elaborately costumed in this custom made beaver hat, and it's done up in this like fancy cavalier outfit with boots with spurs. And he's like, he is the most devilishly handsome man you've ever seen. And my prop designer worked so hard on getting the book together and making that right. It's like, and you can't see any of it because it's too
yeah,
fucking dark.
yeah. That's really funny, and I can really sympathize with that. But he made the absolute right call.
Yeah.
I love the way this is presented. So he kind of he walks. We see the book on the ground, and then he walks behind her, and it's so dark. She's illuminated by the candlelight, but we can see him moving in the background. We can tell that someone's there, but we can't get a good view of him at all. If you look really closely, you can kind of see the outline of a face with like a mustache, but it's very unclear. And he says, "Remove thy shift," which is the undergarments she's wearing. And then the final line of the movie is so good. She says, "I cannot write my name." And he says, "I will guide thy hand." Boom, cut, hard cut to the shot of the woods of her walking naked into it with the goat Black Phillip following behind. Before we move on to what happens after that, I love the detail throwing in right at the end there that she actually doesn't know how to write her name, like that she's actually
Yeah.
illiterate. And he's like, "Don't worry, I'll help you." Like that's really interesting. It's a nice
Yeah.
little detail to throw in there at the end. And so, go ahead.
Dost thou like a pack of Newports? Pepsi and some red vines. Oh god, it's too good. What would you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the what would thou'st do for a Klondike bar? All of it. It's good. It's all good. Keep it coming.
And so she walks naked into the woods. Apparently, they could not get her to ride naked on the back of a goat. So they scrapped that idea and had her walk into the woods. She walks into the woods, and at a bonfire in the woods, she finds a bunch of old hag witches dancing around in a circle around a fire. They're chanting some sort of, you know, occult gibberish, we'll call it. Did he talk at all about what that's supposed to be, like what they're saying?
Yeah. So he originally wanted it to sort of be. Oh no, sorry, that's the song over the end credits. It's basically like old Elizabethan type songs, done by the choir essentially. Um, like
The
a
chanting?
yeah. It's
But like, what words are they saying? They're not saying
it,
English words.
he doesn't talk about like what words.
Okay.
Most of what he talks about in this scene is how he was having a very difficult time articulating what the dance was should look like, and
Okay.
he ended up just stumbling on YouTube across Japanese. What's the I had not heard of it until today. Japanese dancing, I think it's called.
Butoh.
Buto, yeah, Japanese Buto dancing, which is it's got a very demonic, quality to it, writhing and kind of like
Contorting and yeah.
turns out one of the top Japanese Buto choreographers in the world lives and works in Toronto, which is near where they were shooting. So they got her to come out and design the dance,
Butoh dance.
the
with
Buto
the wishes
dance,
at the end. Yeah.
which is really really interesting. I was wrong actually. I don't know what he doesn't talk about the chanting in there. I was thinking of in the credits song, the song that plays during the credits, which he said is like his favorite part of the movie. That is a woman who sings old Elizabethan
Folk song.
music and folk songs and stuff. I'm not sure what the chanting is on this one.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious if he mentioned it because I don't know what language it's supposed to be. It's a lot of like and chanting and like weird demonic occult gibberish. But they're chanting around, and then Anya Taylor-Joy stumbles upon them, or not stumbles, is like comes out and sees them, and then they start floating into the air, and then quickly she starts floating into the air too. And all credit to Anya Taylor-Joy here. I love her performance in this moment.
Yeah.
I love her performance throughout the movie. She's incredible in every scene, but in this scene in particular, there's some weird combination of laughing and crying that she's doing as she's being lifted up into the air. I read in the original script that this is supposed to like that he wrote her as like laughing and like this like blissful euphoric sort of thing. But when you watch it, and you look at the face she's making, it's like a weird, like she's very quickly ping-ponging back and forth between like a laugh and a cry. Like she can't just like her body can't decide which to do.
Yeah.
And it's so good. Like it's perfect.
Yeah.
Like it's very impressive. And it's interesting to learn that essentially that wasn't scripted. That was like kind of either found in the moment or something she brought to the table, but it
Apparently
really
they did that shot, like that was the last shot that they did for the entire picture basically.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
they had done it many times, so by the end she was, delirious. It was late at
Yeah.
night,
Yeah, it's a night shoot.
Yeah.
It's the last day of a long, probably emotionally taxing production especially for her character.
Yeah.
She's got a lot of emoting to do. And then they're being lifted up in the air. It's just take 20 or something. And like I imagine there's a sort of tiredness that comes through where like she's exhausted and doesn't know whether to like laugh or smile or cry, and she's kind of like going back and forth between them. It's really effective. And then we see them all floating up in the air, illuminated by the bonfire below, and that's the end of the movie. The VVitch.
Pretty damn good. Pretty damn good
Yes,
start.
it's a brutal movie.
Yeah.
It really is. It's tough, but like amazing performances. I think it's incredibly well directed. I love the dialogue. Has been mentioned many times. There's something very poetic about it, poetic and yet also believable,
Yeah.
which is a tough line to walk sometimes. And I love the attention to detail in terms of the period costumes, but not just like costumes and attire and scenery and all that stuff, but like religious beliefs and sort of cultural attitudes. It really does feel like being transported to a different time in a
Yeah.
way that many movies don't manage to do. And I find it really remarkable. And that also makes it all the more horrifying
Yeah.
when things go horribly wrong because you're in it, man. Like you are in this world and you're like, this is terrible. I don't like being here. Please, please get me out of here. Yeah. Very, very impressive first feature, very technically proficient movie. Like the worst I would say about it is that it's a bit more desaturated than I would like, and there's a couple moments that just feel a
Like
little on
cheating a
the
little
cheap
bit. Yeah.
horror side. Yeah, where it's just like, you could have done a little better than the obvious horror thing in this moment, but it's still good. And there's plenty of stuff that is far more, I guess, elevated, far more interesting than the obvious basic horror thing. There's
Yeah.
so much to admire and appreciate about the spooks in this movie, the spooky scenes and the horrible things that happen. A lot of it very character driven. I think that's why it resonates so much with me
Yeah.
because it makes everything worse. Like imagine this movie, but you didn't care about any of the characters. Or you didn't really believe them as people, as is often the case in a lot of bad horror movies. Like it would be so much weaker. Like its strength, I think, really lies in how well fleshed out all these people feel and how much you can kind of relate to all of them and sympathize with and feel pity for this horrible situation they're all in. Even the dad who this is almost all his fault, right? But there's something you can understand and sympathize with him
Yeah.
for
Exactly.
for
Well,
doing
he's
all of this.
sticking to, like, I mean, it is all his fault, but he's sticking to his principles, and he's doing what he can to make himself, successful in this land. But he he just doesn't admit his faults until it's too late, and that's the tragedy of it for him. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah,
I
man.
think it's a movie that does a really good job of having the main like the main sin being committed being pride that isn't just a villain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of prideful villains out there, right? But like, he's not exactly the villain. You know, he's far too sympathetic for that. Um, but it's a really good exploration of pride with through him. You know what I mean? And like how it can lead you to destruction and corruption and all that sort of stuff. It's great.
Yeah.
Great performances,
Great
great score.
performances.
We didn't talk about the score very much, but there's a real authenticity to like the instrumentation of the score in terms of its period accuracy and the types of sounds that are being made on the score. They're obviously very tense and like a lot of string-based instruments. So it's not like reinventing the wheel in terms of horror spooky score, but it's quite effective, I would say, and it really transports you to the time. And a lot of times, it's really doing a lot to add to the vibe, doing a
Yeah.
lot to add to the overall experience. Especially, you know, when the witches are like levitating up towards the moon and stuff like that. The music that's playing there, I really like the music that plays when Caleb stumbles upon the witch, the sexy witch in the
Yeah.
woods. That particular musical cue is pretty haunting. This very like cluster chord kind of dissonance that's happening there that's just lingering the whole time. Ooh, it's good.
Yeah, and a really like you see all of the elements that he's going to bring to his movies, moving forward. But like and there are parts here, right, where it's like, okay, that's like we were saying, maybe a little bit too much cheating towards the horror spooks. He's even got those scenes where he's like, yeah, this shot fucking sucks. I hate it. We ran out of time. And then you look at it a little bit closer and you're like, you know what? Yeah, that one you could probably like it's not great, it's just something that you needed to get. So you can kind of see where all the, it's rough around the edges at certain points, but overall, like it's a really, especially for a debut feature, it's really good,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
a real lightning in a bottle getting all these talented actors together,
And especially just because most horror movies are crap.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's always nice when
Yeah.
someone comes along and makes a genuinely really solid horror movie. It's just like, oh, damn, that's great. We don't get a lot of those.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
It
Please.
kind of went off the rails when they made the sequel, The Witches. That changed things up a little bit.
The Witches of Eastwick with Jack Nicholson.
No, just the Witches with Angelica Houston.
Oh, okay. There's a lot of jokes you could make there. I'm
The
going
Witches
with
of
the Witches of
Eastwick is the third in the trilogy, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
The Witches take Eastwick.
The Witches do Manhattan.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much else to say about Witch. It's good.
It's yeah, pretty excited to continue with this Eggers arc.
I
having
am
a great time already,
especially for the Lighthouse next week because that's my favorite of the three. The Lighthouse, and that one's going to be a bit more fun too.
Yeah. Yeah,
What are the best
that might also be
debut
my favorite. Yeah.
Someone asked, "What are the best debut features in our opinion?" That's a good
Boy.
question. I'm gonna see if I can find because I'm surely gonna forget some. If I can just pick up a list here. 100 greatest directorial debuts. I don't know if I need 100 IMDb. Um, that's a lot. Let's see. Well, I think this is a really solid one. I think Reservoir Dogs is a really solid one as well. Wait, no way. 12 Angry Men was his feature debut. Was it really?
Sidney, you're joking.
Was it really? That's what Google is saying, but sometimes Google lies. Hold on a second. Director.
That's Sidney Lumet, right?
Yeah. Lumet? I actually don't know. No, that was not his first movie. He'd done so this is the complicating factor. A lot of guys from that generation made a lot of TV movies before they made their first like proper movie, but I feel like that doesn't quite count.
Yeah, no, I mean like
Lumet had done like
Oh shit!
plenty of episodes of television, a few TV movies, and then he made 12 Angry Men, which is, not to discount it because it's great, but I feel like that it's not quite the same as like someone who's made like one or two short films and this is the first feature thing they've ever done. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
I was gonna say In Bruges, but that's not his first. That's not his
No, it isn't.
debut.
Um, let's. Well, I quite like Christopher Nolan's Following.
Oh yeah,
I think
that's pretty good.
that's quite an underrated movie. I don't think people give that one enough credit. What was Martin Scorsese's first movie? I actually don't know what it was.
Oh,
Find
Lock,
out.
Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. Guy Ritchie, his first.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Um, yeah, I don't think Martin Scorsese's debut is particularly famous. It appears to be called New York City ... melting point.
So, Taxi Driver Part 1.
I haven't seen some of his earliest movies, but I haven't heard anyone talking about those, so I'm going to assume that wasn't like, what's his name? Stanley Kubrick doesn't have an especially strong first feature either. I've seen Fear and Desire. It's fine. He doesn't really become the Stanley Kubrick we all know and love until probably either The Killing or Paths of Glory. So that's kind of nice to know sometimes, is that he had to make a few kind of mediocre movies first.
What's Spielberg's first movie?
It's a Duel. Duel's good. I like Duel. Duel is like the guy who's being like, there's the truck driver who's like trying to kill him.
Okay, so someone
Duel's
asked,
fun.
is Citizen
Terminator.
Kane,
Yeah,
is Citizen Kane Orson Welles' first film? And no, Orson Welles' first film as a director was called Too Much Johnson in 1938.
That's funny.
Dude,
James Cameron counts if you exclude, like, what was it, Piranha 3D or whatever he did.
yeah, one of the Piranha movies.
He kind of wasn't he like a director for hire on that or something?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of his oeuvre,
Citizen Kane was Orson Welles' second feature, though. So,
hey, pretty
you
good.
know what? That's a pretty solid follow-up to Too Much
Pretty
Johnson.
good. Was Ex Machina Alex Garland's debut? It was the first one he directed. He had written several features.
Well, yeah, because you don't want to. We probably shouldn't count Dread as his even though that was technically his first direction experience, right? Because he's not credited. So his first credited one is Ex Machina. That's his best for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, Terminator's not his first because he did Piranha, whatever it's called. Let's see. What else we got? Blood Simple by the Coens.
Oh yeah. That's
Blood
a great one.
Simple's great. I really like Blood Simple. Let's see.
What about John Ford? What was his?
I don't know. You'll have to look that up for me. 10 best directorial debut movies of all time, says Collider.com. All right, let's see
what you got.
Night of the Living Dead, 1968.
Romero, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great movie. I really like that movie. Is that really his first movie?
I think
If it is,
yeah.
that's high on the list. Past Lives, yep. Past Lives is overrated as fuck. Ex Machina.
They counted Past Lives. Nah, not a fan.
Well, that's our first feature.
Shaun of the Dead, was that Edgar Wright's first? Edgar Wright was doing TV before, I think, because
he did Spaced and this list has Citizen Kane as number one.
Yeah, technically it's a second though. I mean, maybe he was a director. Maybe it was like a director for hire situation.
Maybe. Anyway, there are some pretty solid first features that we mentioned.
Apparently Edgar Wright's debut was not Shaun of the Dead. It was a movie called A Fistful of Fingers in 1995. That was his first.
I've heard of that, yeah. Topaz Dude is saying that Too Much Johnson isn't a complete film, so perhaps that doesn't count.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. So maybe
in that case, it's got to be Citizen Kane, right?
Yeah, it's got to. I mean, yeah, if it's not, if Too Much Johnson is in a full movie.
because I'm tempted to not give it to 12 Angry Men only because he had done TV movies before, and I'm like, I know there's a difference, but that's still making a feature film.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
Like,
yeah, well, I guess, now in particular, TV movies kind of just happen.
well, it was a different thing then, but still, I'm not giving it to him. We're gonna give it to Orson Welles for Citizen Kane. Anywho,
Too Much Johnson isn't a complete movie, which should mean it's too little Johnson.
I get it.
That's funny. Good one.
Oh, Bottle Rocket's a pretty good debut as well by Wes Anderson.
Oh, yeah, I don't think I've seen that one.
You should. All right. Well, is there anything else to talk
No, I
about?
think we're good. Back next week
Um,
with The Lighthouse for sure.
Back next week with The Lighthouse. If for whatever reason you haven't seen the short film that we released on this channel a few weeks ago, go check that out
Yeah.
because that's fun. And yeah, The Lighthouse next week. The Northman probably the week after that, unless any holiday things get in the way. It will be the next stream after The Lighthouse whenever it happens. And then
December is
Nosferatu.
for the boys, and by that I mean Robert Eggers.
Yes. True. So that will be fun. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you all for hanging out and for saying worthwhile things in the chat. We appreciate it.
As always.
Hope you enjoyed that discussion of the VVitch. And we'll see you next time. We'll see you on Sunday. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Toodaloo.